Chapter 1421, Reunion. Khan seemed to ignore the king completely as he rushed toward the city's intact areas, carrying Colonel Norrit and the huge Major General Angan on his back. Still, that couldn't be further from the truth. Despite not inheriting the Nak's legacy, Khan's status had changed, and the Scarlet Eyes King had to respect it. Khan was an equal, standing on the very opposite end of the spectrum compared to the true chaos. Besides, the king was sure a fight would happen. The two didn't need to exchange words or looks to reach that understanding. Khan also knew he could deal with the wounded safely before addressing that fateful battle. Of course, that didn't stop Khan and the king from keeping each other in check through their perception, but the former soon had to address something that felt more serious in his mind, something closer to his heart. Except for a small spot, the path toward Aina's few surviving blocks was clear, but Khan didn't have the heart to avoid it. There was someone he had to meet there, someone he hadn't seen in over 3 years. The medical team from the jeep was hard at work to stabilize Rodney and patch George up when Khan suddenly appeared before the group. His eyes shed blue light over the area as he dropped the 2 injured evolved warriors to the sand. His arrival seemed to freeze time, which it partially did for him and someone else. Monica was already looking at Khan. Her body had instinctively reacted to his arrival, guided by a force that defied reason, putting her before the many profound changes she couldn't help but spot. On the surface, Khan looked precisely like the last time Monica had seen him. His arms didn't have scars anymore, and the right one featured an intricate blue tattoo, but that seemed to be it. Nevertheless, the more profound changes were so striking for Monica that she almost couldn't believe Khan was the same person she had loved so much and partially still did. In the past, Khan felt powerful and heavy. His sole presence in a room or someone's surroundings could make everything tremble and break. He was so oppressive that Monica herself had started experiencing an instinctive fear of him. Now, that oppressive feeling was gone, replaced by something far worse. Khan looked grander and superior, so much so that Monica believed she would fail to grasp him if she reached out with her hand. That unreachability wasn't the end. Monica recognized the veiled guilt under Khan's silver crown but also saw much more, something that reassured and saddened her at the same time. Khan seemed to have lost something heavy. The pain hidden behind his glowing gaze wasn't there anymore. He looked free, unburdened, and unmistakably happy. Khan went through something similar during that mutual inspection. Monica looked thinner, almost sickish, but no less beautiful. Yet, she was still a 4th-level warrior, which inevitably affected how Khan perceived her. Monica had already felt brittle to Khan in the past, but was straight-up inferior now. The gap between the two was so vast that words wouldn't suffice to describe it. They simply belonged to different worlds that would never meet again. Both sides became aware of that immense, impossible-to-fill gap, and both felt sad about it. After sharing such deep, intense love for so long, their paths had ended up diverging by so much. Yet, those differences didn't eliminate or sour the lingering affection. No matter what happened, Khan would love Monica. She would always be one of the dearest people in his life, and the same went for her, which she showcased through a simple, reassuring smile. Monica, Khan called, matching that simple smile, taking a step forward, only for someone to appear on his path. A half-bandaged, exhausted Rodney somehow slipped past the doctors to stand up to Khan. His still reptilian brown eyes sternly looked through the blue halo, conveying a clear stance he soon put into firm words. "You hurt Miss Solidary enough," Rodney declared. Khan didn't have any bad intentions. He only wanted to have a friendly reunion. It also felt right to exchange a few words with Monica after so long and the many changes in his status. Yet, Rodney wasn't exactly in his right mind. He tried to look strong, but Khan easily saw through that facade, also noticing the mutagen's seemingly permanent side effect. Still, Rodney's stance did highlight something else, too, which made Khan's eyebrows arc in surprise. He looked past the exhausted man, only to find Monica avoiding his gaze while playing with her curls. Khan glanced down at George at that point, only to see a similar reaction. The man shrugged his shoulders and wore an awkward smile, basically confirming that something was going on. That surprising development would have usually sent Khan into his protective mode. Despite not seeing Monica in that way anymore, he still wanted what was best for her, and Rodney couldn't possibly be it. However, another major event claimed Khan's attention before he could voice his usual threat. Khan peeked past his shoulder before anything unfolded, and the group followed his gaze in time to see an area behind him bend and twist. A white halo also spread there, releasing a cold aura that lowered the desert's temperature. A small layer of ice became visible once the light dimmed, resting on top of the white sand and continuing to expand. A dark figure donning the Thilku Empire's colors also stood at its center, gazing in the direction of the alien king. The inspection was short, and the white light radiated by the newcomer's eyes soon moved toward Khan and the group in front of him. Needless to say, everyone recognized her, and she also recognized them. Lisa walked off the layer of ice, stepping on the white sand, only for it to freeze during her advance. She didn't need to show off like that, but Khan understood and felt her reasons, which her following words highlighted. "Husband," Lisa called, stopping at Khan's right side, taking his hand so that their tattoos could combine. That was a declaration for the group, which she planned to wear proudly, only for Khan to pull her arm and send an even clearer message through a public kiss. Chapter 1422, Fate. Time had passed. A proper marriage had also happened, and Yeza had even been born. However, Khan and Lisa still had to pay the price for their miraculous union. His guilt and her jealousy couldn't be dealt with so easily. They weren't normal by any stretch of the imagination, and their feelings had to match that. Of course, things had gotten better after Yeza, but the area featured Monica, the only other woman Khan had ever loved. She was a trigger for both sides of the married couple, but Khan seized the initiative, expressing how he felt through a simple gesture. The public kiss was probably overkill, especially in that desperate situation, but Khan believed he needed to do it for Lisa, Monica, and himself. After all, that was how Khan truly felt. He had loved Monica, but Lisa was simply the only one for him. Despite his jokes, he couldn't think about spending his life with anyone else, and everyone had to know that. Khan kept the kiss short, soon retracting his head, only to see Lisa's scolding, meaningful eyes following him. He knew she appreciated the gesture. Their mental connection shared something far more improper, but they both had quite urgent tasks to do there. "Go," Lisa muttered, placing her free hand on Khan's exposed chest. "I'll take care of things here, and he is waiting for you." "I should also get it done quickly," Khan pointed out, warily glancing at the sky. "I don't know how long it will take for that guy to come down." Lisa didn't reply. She glanced in the distance again, toward the alien king. Unlike most evolved warriors, she could gauge how strong that entity was, and the sight was concerning. Khan would have to get serious to defeat him. Still, Lisa didn't feel any worry. She clawed her fingers on Khan's chest, attracting his attention to deliver another quick kiss to his lips. That temporary goodbye didn't require additional words, so Khan browsed his bright eyes over the group before disappearing from the area. Lisa followed that nigh-invisible departure before turning back to the group. Everyone was still frozen at her sudden appearance, and the aloof expression she wore didn't help, but a faint smile broadened on her cold face when she looked at one of the sitting men. "George," Lisa greeted. "Lisa," George nodded, doing his best to suppress a smirk, but partially failing at that. Lisa's face regained its usual cold traits when she glanced at the wounded, standing man. Somehow, Rodney was still on his feet, but his injured state didn't earn him any mercy. "Scum," Lisa called in her native language. "Miss Lisa," Rodney replied, traces of mockery in his tone. Lisa ignored the veiled mockery and briefly studied the two fainted and injured evolved warriors before addressing the main point of interest in the group. Her white glow rose to illuminate Monica, and she matched that look, wanting to inspect her properly as well. Both Monica and Lisa had seen each other on the network, but that was their first real meeting. Also, Lisa would have understood who she was even without that. Khan's aura had been more than telling. Monica was refined in ways Lisa could never hope to be, especially in that beautiful dress. She was also undeniably beautiful, and her feelings for Khan were genuine despite partially putting him aside. Meanwhile, Monica confirmed what she had already thought after the footage. Lisa was more similar to Khan than any human ever could be. She was effortlessly stunning, existing in his same world, providing the kind of support Monica never could. That mutual inspection seemed to last for an eternity, at least for the bystanders, but Lisa eventually moved, lowering her head and performing a traditional Nicole's bow. It's an honor to meet you, Monica Solidary, Lisa announced. I'm Lisa, Khan's wife. Lisa didn't need to add that last point, but Monica understood why and ended up wearing a simple smile hearing that. She would have done the same if she were in Lisa's position in the end. The honor is mine, Monica exclaimed, performing an elegant curtsy. I heard much about you from my former fiancé. Lisa straightened herself, welcoming that blow in response to her previous statement. In a different situation, it would have annoyed her, but Khan's kiss had prevented that. Is it done? Monica asked when she saw that Lisa was about to address the injured. Is the curse lifted? Lisa refocused on Monica, showing her brightest smile yet, giving it meaning with her following words. It is. My husband just had his first quiet sleep in 23 years. Monica couldn't contain her happiness hearing that. The curse that had afflicted Khan for so long was finally gone. She couldn't be the one enjoying his now quiet nights, but the fact that it had taken the reunion with Lisa for Khan to get rid of his nightmares proved her superiority once again. Of course, George shared that happiness at the news but felt unable to join the conversation, especially since those two women weren't done yet. Though it's curious, Lisa announced, her glowing gaze darting between Monica and Rodney, who was still wearing his protective stance. For the only other woman my husband loved and the man who betrayed my species to end up together, it must be fate. We aren't together, Monica promptly clarified, and Rodney intervened before the conversation could grow more awkward. Why don't you tell us what that fate of yours thinks about this battle? Rodney snorted. Lisa didn't like that tone, and her hand swiftly shot forward, slamming two fingers on Rodney's forehead. Her fingertips pierced his skin, triggering something that made his entire body shake. Rodney fell to his knees, coughing to no end as blood vessels all over his body exploded. Blood spurted out of those shallow wounds while he puked saliva and a dark green substance. The sudden attack left the group speechless, but Rodney soon stabilized, even lifting his head to show his now human eyes. It seemed Lisa had forcefully expelled the mutagen's side effects. Lisa briefly studied the kneeling Rodney before turning toward the distant battlefield, her glowing gaze growing pensive and wise as she decided to address the previous question. How would I know? Lisa asked. My element isn't fate. The reply was quite disappointing. The king had turned out to be more powerful than anyone could have expected, so George and Rodney were betting on Khan to beat him. Obviously, the latter would never admit that. But I wouldn't worry, Lisa continued. My husband can break fate, too. Chapter 1423, Request. Khan took no time to reappear before the alien king and stopped a few meters from him, finally allowing a proper mutual inspection. Except for the additional horn, the king looked no different from the scouts Khan had fought in the past. He already wore scarlet eyes despite those protuberances on his forehead being intact, but the real differences lay underneath the surface. The conclusions George had reached through a mixture of tests and guesses were plain to see for Khan. The king naturally wielded the dense, glowing true chaos that the scouts had harnessed only after breaking their horns. That alien was unmistakably superior to the warriors Khan had fought, and the vastness of his existence put him several levels above them. Yet, Khan had also changed in ways he wasn't completely aware of. The sudden escape from the Naxx home world and the subsequent rush to reach Earth had given Khan little to no time to absorb his gains from the white azure sphere. Of course, Khan's body had finished devouring that mana, increasing his attunement, but his mind had yet to get used to his new state and the knowledge he had obtained. Moreover, Khan had just gone through another revolutionary event. He had experienced his first nightmare-free sleep in decades merely hours ago. Khan had yet to come to terms with that victory, but the battlefield had already claimed his presence. Khan's only certainty was that he felt strong, stronger than he had ever been in the past. Look, Khan announced, scratching his head while emotions blended with his words to speak the Naxx language. I just left my crazy ex-fiancé and my even crazier wife together, and I don't know how long they can go before one kills the other. Khan let go of his hair to point at the sky, continuing. I also left an impatient monster in orbit, and he won't be as nice to this planet once he manages to come down. The king seemed to understand and accept Khan's words since his scarlet irises moved to the sky before returning to his opponent. So, Khan added, can we fight somewhere else? I'm going to kill you anyway. I just prefer to avoid turning this quadrant into a wasteland in the process. Khan realized something when his glowing gaze fell on his surroundings. With Aina mostly destroyed, the quadrant mainly had white, radioactive sand left. Well, Khan muttered, more of a wasteland. The king's stern expression finally broke, revealing a surprising, faint smile. Some of his sharp black teeth became visible, but the whisper-like sound that escaped his mouth obviously carried more meaningful reactions. You are the being the mana appointed for godhood, the king exclaimed. You failed, son of the mana. I haven't succeeded yet, Khan corrected. There's a difference. There won't be any more escapes or experiments, the king continued. Our god will devour everything and reign supreme. About that, Khan said, do you know how or where I can meet this god of yours? I kind of need him for something. Our god is wherever his true chaos is, the king responded. I'm unworthy, but you are standing before a shard of his magnificence, son of the mana. Khan couldn't help but drop part of his casual stance. The crumbles of knowledge inherited from the white azure sphere mostly had to do with his own inclinations, but he could also come up with more solid conclusions through them. What had happened in the Nak's home world, the king's existence, and his words seemed to point toward a sort of hive mind social structure. It looked similar to what the crows had with their spheres and what the Nak had with the mana. However, instead of impersonal, rational processes, the true chaos god wielded a proper personality with intense features. In a way, he was like Khan, standing on a superior realm without giving up on the traits that made him somewhat human. Of course, Khan couldn't be sure. He also didn't know how good that was, but any piece of information helped. Still, that more serious mood forced him to address another point. Mr. Shard of Magnificence, Khan called. I asked nicely, but it seems you misunderstood me. Mine wasn't a request. The king's faint smile froze as his left arm snapped up, barely in time to block the sudden kick that was about to land on his torso. Khan had charged forward, and his monstrous physical strength instantly displayed its power. Major General Angan had lifted sandstorms with his heavy blows, but Khan was a superior entity. The sand below and around the point of impact directly vanished, unable to retain a solid form under the unleashed pressure. A circular cavity bigger than the pillars unleashed by the tactical nukes expanded under Khan and the king, leaving them in mid-air. The depths of the white desert appeared in the open, only for their color to change. If I ask you to move, Khan exclaimed, purple-red fumes escaping his fingers as he pointed his left hand at the alien face. You move. A blinding flash spread through the area, followed by a thunderous noise. The desert opened, cut in half by a zigzagged, fuming fissure that featured glass-like edges, revealing a retreating figure on its distant tip. The king flew backward on his own, pushed by the unfathomable momentum gained after the clash with that instantaneous spell. That momentum wasn't the only thing the king gained after the clash. A diagonal cut had appeared on his chest, stretching as high as his left shoulder. Still, the injury was already releasing black smoke, healing the alien's flesh and robe. Nevertheless, something materialized next to the king as he worked to disperse his momentum. A single tongue of purple-red fire appeared at his side, only for a spark to flash in its liquid fabric and expand it into a raging inferno. The flames seemed alive and angry as they chased after the king, encircling and enveloping him in their scorching, destructive gales. Sparks also ran over their liquid surfaces, but their all-melting fabric soon exploded outward. The king reappeared in the open, glowing smoke flickering all over his figure, seemingly turning him into a gaseous existence. Yet, something heavy violently slammed on his chest, taking him by surprise and pushing him away once again. Some of the tongues of true chaos dispersed as the king shot backward, stopping only when his back crashed onto the city's defensive wall. It had only taken 2 attacks to make the alien cross almost half of Aina, but he didn't consider that point even once. He couldn't, since something that deserved his full attention had appeared at some distance in front of him. King of the true chaos, Khan called, calmly advancing through the sand, purple-red mana still blowing out of his fingers. Do I have to break your horns myself to make you fight seriously? Chapter 1424, Pew. Of course, Khan didn't know whether the Scarlet Eyes Kings followed the same patterns as the Scouts, but it sounded like a safe bet. After all, his opponent wore similar horns on his forehead, so the chances of a possible power-up were high. Yet, the king didn't reach for those small protuberances on his forehead. He stepped outside the human-sized dent his figure had created when he slammed into the wall, landing on the white sand and raising his arms into a fighting stance. "King's horns aren't for kings to break," the king announced as the flickering smoke on his back rose higher. "Son of the mana. My father's name was Brett," Khan snorted, lifting his still-releasing mana left hand. A thunderous noise resounded high in the sky. Few dense clouds appeared far above the defensive wall, darkening, before brightening, gaining purple-red shades. Sparks ran over the clouds as their dense, bright gas amassed, condensing until another thunderous noise resounded, releasing a lightning bolt that rushed toward the desert. Khan performed a grabbing motion, and a lightning bolt as tall as a building appeared in his lifted hand, its crackling tip scorching the sand underneath. The king's true chaos flickered higher in response, but his eyes and perception suddenly went blind. A third, deafening thunder resounded in the area. The king recovered from the flash of blinding light, only to find himself floating again. His overall altitude hadn't changed, but everything above and below him had disappeared. The defensive wall now featured a zigzagged, fuming fissure, and the sand directly below had turned into scorching glass that solidified a deep cavity. The king hovered at the center of those two environmental wounds, wearing a new charred, vertical scar on his torso. True chaos blew out of the scar, but the king thrust his right arm forward, painting the air crossed through his gesture black. He seemed to want to grab the air, only for Khan's figure to appear before him. The king's fingers pierced Khan's chest, but another Khan appeared on his right, his knee already pointed at his temple. The attack was unavoidable, so the alien could only steel his teeth when that unstoppable force slammed into his head. Khan's attack flung the king sideways, but the smoke on his back flared, quickly stopping him while turning into vast, fiery wing-like protuberances. He also swung those gaseous body parts, which released a barrage of bullets toward the still invisible but incoming opponent. One Khan appeared, and then another, and then a third. 3 Khans were flying at high speed toward the king, heading headfirst toward the incoming barrage of black bullets. The bullets exploded before Khan could begin dodging them, unleashing darker-than-black darkness that took the shape of huge ellipses. The air and very space around those spells twisted, trapped by the individual gravity they enforced, but Khan seemed unaffected by that force. The 3 Khans split into 6 as they made their way through the remaining bullets and hovering ellipses. Some of his copies remained behind, stuck in the second before his evasive maneuvers, but others kept advancing, showing the results of those moves. That trend continued as more bullets exploded into those all-devouring ellipses. 12 Khans appeared, and then 24, but the king couldn't care for numbers when something far more concerning was unfolding. Khan occasionally closed his eyes, seemingly flying blindly through that barrage of gravity-altering bullets. Still, his speed only increased, often relying on those pulling forces to accelerate even more. What was probably one of the deadliest wide-range spells in the universe was nothing more than a playground for Khan. He flowed freely through those attacks, turning them to his own advantage, suddenly appearing before the king. The king had been able to see those shocking details due to his sharp perception, but everything had happened instantly. Less than a second had passed since his attack, but Khan was already in front of him, his leg stretched toward his chest. Khan's leg didn't just stay still. It performed sharp and minute back-and-forth movements, trapping the king and his surroundings into an ethereal earthquake. The fabric of the world shook and threatened to break, and the same went for the alien. The king saw his robe and flesh blowing up whenever a new tremor ran through him. His cape also exploded while the vast gaseous wings crumbled, dispersing even further whenever the world resumed shaking. The earthquake seemed to want to trap the king until his whole existence turned into dust. Still, more glowing smoke escaped from his back and injuries, pushing away the tremors to give him enough freedom to counterattack. The king cupped his left fist before thrusting his elbow forward. The messy desert below resonated with his attack, opening and blowing forward. The attack also released a torrent of true chaos, which shared part of its physical might and overall pressure, unleashing a black, glowing storm that blew forward. Nevertheless, the attack ended up being short-lived. The elbow rose until it hit something unfathomably solid and unmovable. The impact was so violent that a roar spread through the area, deepening the damage on the nearby defensive wall while adding new cracks. Still, the black storm suffered from a far worse fate, freezing on the spot before crumbling into a rain of gaseous shards. A figure wearing the Thilku Empire's colors appeared among that black rain that quickly lost its glow and dispersed in the sky. Khan was in front of the king, keeping that dark elbow sealed in his grasp. Meanwhile, Khan's free hand had taken the shape of a gun, pointing 2 fingers at the king. "Pew," Khan muttered, his cold tone not matching that childish word at all, while a blinding light flashed 3 times in a row, followed by the same number of thundering noises. The blinding light quickly vanished, only to show that the king's torso had gained 3 fuming holes that pierced him from side to side. Charred, cracked skin expanded from their edges, releasing some drops of blood, but his scarlet eyes went to an area above him, where Khan had already unleashed his next attack. "Wait," Khan said, lowering his bent leg, and an entire world seemed to fall on the king, squashing him into the desert. Chapter 1425, Canvas. A force the king did his best to oppose, but ultimately couldn't, slammed on his head, flinging him down to the desert, where those flattening effects kept raging. A vast, circular cavity that had the king at its center formed on the white sand, flattening everything inside that edge and pushing it further down. The giant hole deepened as that unstoppable force squashed the alien's body. Black, glowing smoke had never stopped flowing from the king's back and injuries, and more was trying to rise in an attempt to fend off that ethereal but titanic stomp. However, nothing seemed to work. Some injuries closed, only for more to open and spurt out black blood. Meanwhile, the rising smoke also fell prey to the ethereal stomp, flattening alongside the sand and its source. The king could only endure and gather his strength, amassing enough power to deliver a proper counterattack. Yet, that fraction of a second made room for some genuine inspection, which brought worrisome answers. Truth be told, the alien evolved warrior knew that Khan was an exception among the sons of the Mana. That energy had brought him up to be a challenger to the true Chaos God, succeeding in some aspects. Khan was immune to the true Chaos properties, or rather, the individual iteration of his Mana stood on the same level, naturally resisting those annihilating features. That was hard to achieve, but not impossible. Khan had evolved past the Mana's limits, partially achieving what that energy wanted him to become. Theoretically, that would only put Khan on par with the Scarlet Eyes warriors, but his other individual skills enforced a starker superiority. His body was monstrous, and his chaos was free. As an evolved warrior, Khan stood far above the average. He had every right to claim the title of king for himself, but a flaw existed in that seemingly undisputed superiority. Khan was no evolved warrior, at least technically. As strong as he was, his existence still lacked something to complete his ascension to that higher state. As for what that ascension would bring, the king didn't know. He was only sure the true Chaos God was unreachable, so the sons of Mana would be doomed even if they obtained an overwhelmingly strong king. The thought put a smile on the king's face, which was accompanied by a torrent of energy. He forcefully spread his arms, waving them upward to oppose the unbearable pressure squashing him down. 2 tides of true chaos erupted from the gesture, rising through the sky to converge in Khan's position. That blackness landed on him, expanding into a dark line that seemed to create a horizon in the air, only for that process to stop abruptly. Something prevented the darker-than-black line from expanding any further. Actually, that same force squeezed it back to its landing spot, as if pushed from both extremities to condense at its center. The already dense smoke grew even thicker and brightened under that forceful pressure, reaching its critical point when it became nothing more than a fist-sized lump of true chaos held tightly in Khan's tattooed hand. Khan inspected the glowing darkness struggling and failing to escape his fingers. His surroundings had dimmed due to that energy's influence, and even his eye's light almost failed to reach its blackness. Yet, its properties were in the open for him to study. Nevertheless, whatever Khan saw, it didn't satisfy him. He closed his hand, crushing that immensely dense lump of true chaos, forcing it to disperse in the sky. The king had begun to stand up in the meantime, still smiling and proud, only for his expression to freeze when Khan slashed the same hand he had used to crush the true chaos at him. 5 giant, bright slashes flew down at the king, releasing a bloodthirsty humming noise and gaining more shaped cavities at their center. The ethereal spell split halfway through its descent. 5 slashes became 10, then 20, then 100, shrinking but expanding their overall reach until the entire circular, flattened cavity was immersed in their purple-red light. The rain of slashes cut off any possible escape path, but the king never considered that approach. Wing-like protuberances blew out of his back again and flapped upward, sending another barrage of all-devouring bullets against the incoming spell. A few slashes exploded into spherical masses of sharp, destructive energy upon clashing with the black bullets, which halted the descent. However, most of the purple-red rain cut through the counterattack, advancing deeper into the flattened cavity and even reaching its bottom, where explosions unfolded. The flattened cavity erupted. The blinding purple-red light devoured the darker-than-black blackness, rising into the sky to create a single, massive pillar of destruction. The king burned amidst that scorching energy. His cape, uniform, and flesh vanished piece by piece, but his overall figure endured the widespread destruction, partially aided by his true chaos, which kept protecting and healing him. The scorching pillar seemed to want to rage to no end, but eventually quieted down, its energy dispersing into the air. The king found himself in the middle of a scorched, destroyed, and glass-like cavity, both his figure and his surroundings releasing grey smoke. The temperature down there was so unbearable that the very air twisted and altered the king's inspection of his surroundings, adding sizzling noises to the apocalyptic scene. Yet, one detail remained unmistakably clear. Khan calmly descended into the cavity, his red cape and blue hair fluttering through the warm gales rising toward the surface. His bare feet landed on the glass-like bottom, unaffected by its scorching temperature. That sight would be terrifying for most beings in the universe. Khan was a herald of destruction, unleashing calamities as easily as he breathed and crossing them unscathed. He was a proper monster, but the king felt no fear. He couldn't be scared when he had seen far higher peaks. As for Khan, he focused on details George had already guessed earlier. The king looked hopeless against him, but not powerless. Despite the barrage of superior, apocalyptic attacks, the alien had always tried to fight back and had managed to some extent. Moreover, it seemed that the king didn't share the scout's limitations. His true chaos wasn't a finite resource. He produced that annihilating energy, meaning he could theoretically heal himself indefinitely. The solution to that was simple. Khan just had to kill the king in one blow. Yet, that alien was unsurprisingly tough, and Khan didn't know what would happen to the city if he went overboard. Also, those horns were still intact. Chances were the king could grow stronger, and Khan sort of wanted to see that happen. I mean, Khan sighed, shrugging his shoulders. I guess you'll just die at this pace. The king was a mess of burns, missing skin, and cracked flesh that leaked black smoke. He was healing, but the damage extended past his mere physical form, so the true chaos took longer to fix the damage. Still, a sudden change unfolded. A heavy, breathtaking pressure spread through the fuming cavity, making the king's eyes go wide. He fell to his knees, spreading his arms in reverence as the true chaos on his back rose to create a darker-than-black canvas. Then, two even darker horizontal lines cut through the canvas, widening to reveal two huge scarlet eyes. Chapter 1426, Ascension. The pitch-black, gaseous canvas was utterly still, but the pair of huge scarlet eyes inside wasn't, albeit they didn't move much. After those darker eyelids opened, the breathtaking gaze fell on Khan, making him experience the entirety of its pressure. An immense, profoundly wise, captivating, and almost unbearably domineering presence converged on Khan, seemingly trying to crush him with that simple look. To Khan's annoyance, he had to admit that the attempt was somewhat working. The power behind that huge, heavy gaze was indeed pushing him down, crushing his very existence out of virtue of sheer superiority. Those weren't mere eyes, they represented the gaze of a proper god. They were like the very core of the mana, except with an intensity only somewhat human emotions could produce. Nevertheless, Khan didn't falter under that oppressive look. His existence didn't break, either. Actually, after getting used to that weight, it slightly expanded, restoring part of its vastness. Of course, that wasn't a real face-off. The true Chaos God wasn't truly there, but Khan kept conveying firm confidence. He didn't only want to put a strong front against that final enemy. Khan also needed to show that a worthy contender had appeared. "We meet again, God of the true Chaos," Khan announced, obviously using the Nax language. "It's a pity you can't come here, can you?" That was a conclusion both Khan and Lisa had reached simultaneously after learning about the widespread attack on their side of the universe. Teleporting so many evolved warriors in numerous locations all over the regulated universe had to have depleted the Scarlet Eye's reserves of true chaos. That obviously was in the realm of speculation. Nothing said the Scarlet Eyes god couldn't just produce more true chaos to reactivate those teleports. However, Khan saw it as clear as day. The true chaos god was too immense, so he would need an equally tremendous amount of energy to appear on Earth. That was highly unlikely, so Khan opted for open mockery to draw a target on his back. Nevertheless, the true chaos god didn't fall for the insult. His huge eyes moved again, pointing at the kneeling king who still had his arms spread in reverence before the canvas as a whole trembled, releasing a deep sound that made the whole desert shake. Ascend, my son. Khan's brain instinctively translated the sound, even if those few words made his whole head shake, almost causing a debilitating headache. Thank you, my god, the king responded, his spread arms rising to reach for his forehead while the huge scarlet eyes closed, vanishing in the canvas, which resumed flickering. The oppressive presence vanished, only for something powerful to take its place. A cracking noise resounded as the king ripped off his horns, which released no blood as he lowered his arms, closed his eyes, and relaxed his hands, making those body parts fall to the glass-like surface. True chaos blew out of the king's back, forehead, and injuries while he was in that reverential, almost worshipping stance. Still, that outburst wasn't wild nor random. The glowing smoke escaped and spread with a precise purpose. The king's injuries and robe instantly healed. The wing-like protuberances from before reappeared and expanded, unfolding in all their fuming, dimming might. As for the missing horns, they reappeared in a gaseous, longer, and curved shape, rising past the alien's forehead but standing still. They almost looked solid despite being made of that glowing smoke, acting as a mark of a new status rather than a mere body part. As a fellow crown wearer, Khan could recognize a similar meaning in those gaseous items. Yet, his attention was on something deeper and grander. The king looked unleashed, as if he could finally show the entirety of his existence and the power he was capable of. My son, Khan repeated the god's words in his mind, sensing a deeper meaning in them, but the king soon forced him to focus on the battle. The king dropped his worshipping stance, reopening his eyes and slowly straightening himself up. His massive, fuming wings flapped, lifting him from the glass-like surface by a few meters. Champion of the mana, the king called, his voice carrying distant echoes of the deep sound released by the god in the black canvas. I'm now worthy of showing you a fraction of our god's magnificence. The king stretched an arm forward, and his fingers shook before his figure released a torrent of glowing black smoke. Waves of true chaos instantly flooded the circular cavity, piercing its edge, before erupting upward. Everything had unfolded quite quickly, even for Khan. The wave's expansion and eruption had been immediate, almost leaving him no opportunity to react. Still, Khan could indeed react. He just didn't. Torrents of true chaos rose upward, engulfing Khan. His mana survived the submersion, but his figure started to shake, struggling to remain in its position. Khan looked down, surprised that his physical strength was being put to the test. Sure, he wasn't feeding his cells any significant amount of mana, but his body still carried ancient horror's genes. In the meantime, a figure swiftly crossed the still rising torrent, appearing before Khan and forcing him to raise his hand. A black elbow ended in his palm, unleashing an unfathomable amount of strength that forced him to bend his legs to remain in his position. The clash dispersed the surrounding smoke, revealing the king stuck in that attack with his elbow. Yet, his wings promptly flapped, adding a strange density to the nearby true chaos. The glass-like ground under Khan's feet started receding. The same went for the surrounding air, true chaos, and his own mana. That wasn't the usual annihilation. Something was pulling it, wanting to devour and dismantle it. The pulling force intensified, obviously having the king and his enormous wings as its center, but Khan didn't let that scare him. His mana opposed that suction, gathering on his free hand, which took the shape of a gun to release two flashes in quick succession. Yet, no thunderous noises followed. Even the flashes immediately dimmed, revealing two lightning bolts stuck in the air in front of the king, shrinking before disappearing inside his figure. Chapter 1427, Black Hole. Khan was at the level where he could instantly analyze a skill's properties, especially when he had seen something similar in the past. The ability the king had used to stop the two lightning bolts could appear connected to the true chaos annihilating powers. After all, it shared many of its troublesome properties. Nevertheless, Khan crossed that off, finding even more similarities with what the taller scout had used against him. The all-devouring ellipses the alien had used to block his spells seemed to be at play there, only on a far larger and powerful scale. The king himself was the all-devouring spell. The lightning bolts had slowed down and shrunk as if attempting to cross distorted space that was governed by unique laws of physics. Then, after absorbing Khan's spells, the king dismantled them inside his own being, turning them into pure energy he could use. That wasn't all the king had absorbed. The receding sand, air, and true chaos also dragged more energy that the king could unleash, which he immediately did since his elbow was still in Khan's grasp. Khan's right hand started to shake as the king's physical strength surged. He was about to summon his cell's power when the pushing force on him abruptly skyrocketed, surprising him and overwhelming his stable stance. A roar rang through the area while a shockwave unfolded, drawing a line between Khan and the king, cutting the cavity and the desert past its edge horizontally. Khan flew back, pushed away violently, slamming on the sandy wall and piercing through it. His figure cut diagonally through the desert, stopping only when it came out of its higher surface. Still, that very surface flowed down, absorbed by a continuous pulling force inside the circular cavity. That ascended entity was absorbing the sand, air, and very world all around him, as if he were a living and breathing black hole. The black hole also moved, the sand on its path disappearing before it could slam into it. Vast chunks of the desert disappeared before Khan's eyes, creating a bottomless groove that threatened to reach him if he didn't do something, which he did. Khan lifted his left hand, purple-red mana already escaping his fingers, before a blinding light flashed through the area. A thunderous noise promptly followed, only for its roar to soften, becoming nothing more than a distant echo. The area added details to that softening. The dimming flash revealed a zigzagged cavity expanding from Khan's position, piercing down into the desert, only to stop before the advancing groove. Moreover, the suction force intensified, expanding its reach and affecting more of the desert. Even pieces of the more distant defensive wall fell prey to it, and the structure as a whole started to bend and tear, groaning while being pulled into the sand. The zigzagged, scorched cavity had exposed the suction force's source. Khan and the king's eyes met, only for the latter to wave his massive wings, sending a series of ellipse-shaped bullets upward, devouring any sand on their path. Khan responded by waving his tattooed hand. A single, tall slash escaped his fingers, releasing bloodthirsty humming noises while diving into the desert, remaining in that singular shape in the face of the barrage of black bullets. The slash cut through a few bullets before being stopped by others. The third wave of those flying ellipses began to devour its fabric, leaving holes in its ethereal structure, and the fourth made it disappear. Khan lifted his leg at that point, an unfathomable amount of mana gathering inside it to feed his cells and create clashing strands of energy. The leg's structural integrity seemed to want to reach its limit while Khan pushed it forward, trying to kick away the entire weight of what was heading his way. However, soon, Khan found himself unable to stretch his leg any further, as if blocked by an invisible wall made of the king's existence and everything he had absorbed. Khan didn't let that stand. He wielded the genes of the mightiest horrors in the universe, and that demanded abiding by the primordial pride. More mana flowed into his cells, feeding them with as much power as they needed, only for something to interrupt the process. A black silhouette appeared before Khan, darkening the whole area. The king had reached him, his folded wings seemingly having triggered a burst of speed, which he channeled into the utmost tip of his rising elbow. The king's attack carried more than that. All the energy accumulated by devouring and dismantling the desert had gathered on the tip of his elbow, which unleashed everything it had when it landed at the center of Khan's torso. A force Khan could only compare to when the Great Old One had broken his body slammed on him, flinging him backward, preventing him from stopping his momentum as he crossed the desert. Khan lost control of his body, his back lifting tall sandy geysers whenever it slammed onto the white landscape. His figure bounced over the desert multiple times, propelled by that unending momentum, carving scars into it. Khan eventually stopped bouncing, only for his figure to continue sliding over the sand, digging through it while the friction force finally started slowing him down. By the time he stopped, he was submerged, a painful sense of uneasiness spreading from his stomach. Khan's cells came alive, pushing his figure upward, making him rise through the sand until his hand could reach for the surface's edge. He pulled himself up, only to sit down. A groan escaped Khan's mouth alongside a drop of blood, which he promptly wiped off. Meanwhile, his eyes remained in the distance, encompassing the gargantuan groove his impact with the desert had created and the winged figure on its opposite end. The king was in the sky, his giant wings unfolded, while his existence kept devouring the world. Torrents of sand and chunks of the broken defensive wall rose toward him, vanishing inside his figure. Even space seemed to twist around the king, making inspecting him through ordinary methods troublesome. He truly was a walking black hole, and his reach kept expanding as more energy flowed into his being. The king wasn't even trying, but the world was disappearing at his mere presence. Luckily, he had to focus on Khan. Otherwise, what was left of the city and the quadrant as a whole would have already disappeared. Well, Khan sighed, managing to use his casual tone in that seemingly tragic situation. He is strong. A cold sensation spread on Khan's hair as loving fingers gently caressed it. Lisa calmly stopped at his side, lightly pulling his head on her leg. I must redo your braids, Lisa commented. So, finish him quickly. Chapter 1428, Spell. Turning back time a little, the spot where Lisa and the others were had slightly changed. The ice Lisa had brought with her had expanded, creating a pure platform that radiated cozy white light. That surface was slightly cold, but its restoring properties prevented any complaint. The various bleeding had slowed down, crawling to a halt. Meanwhile, the wounded flesh had picked up speed in producing new, healthy tissues. Even Rodney's mental exhaustion was receding at an unbelievable speed, its recovery accelerated by the white glow shining under his feet. That general, speedy recovery was so quick that George had long since fully healed. Rodney himself had to remove some of the just-applied bandages, revealing his mostly intact skin underneath. Major General Ongen and Colonel Norrit were exceptions due to their evolved status. Still, they were also going through noticeable changes, their complexions recovering and their breathing becoming steady as their wounds closed. That strange healing technique obviously came from Lisa, but the group couldn't question her since she only showed them her back, gazing at the battle in the distance, which still claimed most of the general attention. All kinds of catastrophes were unfolding near the distant defensive wall. Tides of sand as tall as buildings rose and world-breaking earthquakes raged whenever Khan and the king exchanged blows, sending violent repercussions everywhere. Clearly, that wasn't a battle between mere evolved warriors. That level of power was unfathomable to most of those witnessing it. It almost seemed like Earth was in the way of that fight, inevitably crumbling under the weight of those exchanges. Colonel Norrit awakened when another roar ran through the sky. He released a soft grunt, confused at the glowing ice while he checked his now intact chest, only for the battle in the distance to claim his attention. Is that the little shit? Colonel Norrit asked, but the temperature around him suddenly dropped since a chilling, white light snapped on him. At that point, Colonel Norrit noticed Lisa, connecting her to the ice and his healed status, while also becoming aware of his mistake. I meant, Colonel Norrit cleared his throat. Is that our esteemed prince and leader, my princess? Lisa coldly glared at Colonel Norrit a bit longer before gazing at the distant battle again. Her stance and expression were anything but friendly, but an answer escaped her mouth anyway. The Scarlet Eyes Kings are stronger than both my husband and I have predicted, Lisa announced. Colonel Norrit frowned. As an evolved warrior, he could inspect the battle decently enough despite the distance and only saw Khan's overwhelming superiority. Nevertheless, that abruptly changed when a breathtaking presence suddenly spread throughout the desert, seemingly reaching as far as the quadrant's edges. A vague echo of something that attempted to make the group's eardrums burst spread alongside that immense, captivating presence. Still, the chunk of ice's light intensified, filtering that indistinct but oppressive voice, saving those weaker warriors from additional injuries. The event was so loud and widespread that Major General Ongen woke up at that disturbance, going through the same confusion as his fellow evolved warrior before uttering a similar question. Is that brat finally here? Major General Ongen asked, only for a white, chilling light to snap on him. Major General Ongen's eyes went wide when he saw Lisa, but his reaction was different from the colonel's. You are the wife, aren't you? The general asked, pointing his reground metallic forefinger at Lisa. Something more compelling distracted the group from that awkward exchange. Another roar cut through the sky, and an unbelievably fast figure shot in the intact city's direction, bouncing over the desert multiple times before carving a deep scar in the sand. The event claimed everyone's gaze. Except, Major General Arngen suddenly smelled something familiar, which drew his eyes to Lisa's bleeding hand. "Miss Wife, are you hurt?" the general questioned, inevitably making everyone follow his gaze to Lisa's hand. Yet, she didn't deign him a reply as her figure began to release white light, only to disappear in the next second. Lisa reappeared behind Khan and promptly pulled his head onto her leg. She wanted to smile when he rubbed it on her exposed skin, but the enemy in the distance kept her expression aloof and cold. Also, Lisa needed to remain serious since her spell required some concentration. Another drop of blood fell from Lisa's hand, only to move on its own once it hit the white sand. An intricate symbol took shape before melting into the desert, triggering a widespread reaction that reached as far as the intact piece of the city. Nothing trembled, but something ethereal rose. White light cut through the desert, encircling the intact blocks and expanding in opposite directions, curving to converge in Lisa's position. Once the light came full circle, its glow rose even higher, replicating that convergence in the sky. An ethereal dome took shape, covering any area that still featured traces of life, occasionally displaying red alien symbols on its surface. That massive spell didn't surprise Khan, but he stood up anyway, turning toward that ethereal surface and poking it with his finger. That barrier posed no opposition to his test, but stopping him wasn't its purpose. "Are you sure this can protect you all from me?" Khan wondered, unconvinced. "You stopped trusting your wife after less than a year of marriage," Lisa sighed, attempting to sound dramatic. "I heard the market for single women with children isn't too great, either." "Oh, my," Khan gasped, shining genuine surprise and praise at Lisa. "You are getting so good at this." "You had to get all tense and cute," Lisa pouted, switching to her native language. "Stupid." Of course, that wasn't the time for flirting, so Lisa dropped the act and grabbed the edges of Khan's uniform, pulling him into a short kiss. "Go now," Lisa whispered, her smile turning into a warning look when she patted Khan's shoulders. "And don't ruin my blanket. I'll ask the Emperor to send us a warehouse of capes," Khan sighed. "No, I want this one," Lisa promptly refused, unable to stop herself from giggling while she left Khan and stepped inside the ethereal dome. Khan watched as Lisa's figure brightened and disappeared before heaving another sigh. He scratched his head, already missing her cold touch, but eventually vanishing, too, shooting toward the opponent who had been kind enough to wait for him. "Can you believe it?" Khan shouted, relying on the Nax language, once he entered the area of influence of the king's pulling force. "The greatest threat to my marriage is my cape." "A cape?" The king didn't reply, and Khan didn't wait for an answer, either. He actually peeked at his back, ending up uttering another comment. "The Thilku do make good capes, though." Khan shook his head, pushing aside those stupid thoughts before meeting the king's scarlet gaze. He had grown even stronger after absorbing more of the environment, but that hardly fazed Khan. "Apologies in advance," Khan exclaimed. "Things will get a bit messy." Khan then looked at the sky, his casual tone not matching the magnitude of his following words at all. "World, break for me, will you?" That casual, unreasonable request somehow received an answer. Everything in front of Khan and past the remaining defensive wall erupted into a storm of sand and metal, turning into torrents of energy that gained purple-red hues. Chapter 1429, Smile. The world exploded in ways that no nukes, black tides of raging waves, or catastrophic spells had been able to achieve. The desert as a whole rose. The air shattered, and the broken defensive wall crumbled, turning into energy that painted the sky purple-red. Half of the quadrant just abandoned its physical structure, willingly shattering into energy and spreading its apocalyptic consequences and echoes into the surrounding areas. Luckily, Aina was in the middle of an immense and nigh unfixable desert born from the catastrophic first impact. Earthquakes that carved deep canyons into that white landmass spread everywhere, but nothing of value was lost. However, a piece of what had once been a luxurious city had survived the battle, and those apocalyptic side effects headed its way. Yet, the tremors dampened when they hit the ethereal dome that had enveloped that relatively small area filled with survivors. The huge canyons turned into shallow and narrow cracks once they crossed the white light, stopping advancing after mere meters. Something still leaked inside the dome, but it was bearable. The earthquakes were light, and the heaven-shattering roars became muffled once they seeped past the white light to rage in its insides. Of course, the the king experienced the very opposite end of that intensity. He was right above Khan, so he ended up in the very middle of that explosion. Torrents of matter and energy rose all around the king, engulfing him in their raging might. That overwhelming display of power shocked him for a second, only for firm pride and determination to replace that feeling. The world was shattering all around the king, but he was a black hole. He couldn't have asked for a better battlefield, so the suction force his existence radiated intensified, planning to take that entire quadrant for himself. The wild energy the quadrant was releasing changed course at that more forceful absorption. Yet, it didn't converge toward the king. It curved and bent backward, gathering in a nearby spot under him. The scenery had been unreadable after the world exploded. There was too much sand, storms, and sheer energy to see past it. Nevertheless, all that suddenly disappeared. The world in the king's scarlet eyes became clear again, only for it to fill him with awe. The quadrant was virtually unrecognizable. Several layers of the desert had disappeared, replaced by a bottomless, dark, and immensely vast gorge that seemed to reach as deeply as the bedrock. That transformation wasn't limited to the areas directly in front of the king. Everything at his sides and behind him had also suffered from the same fate, the change being so widespread he couldn't see the gargantuan cavity's distant edges with his bare eyes. Moreover, a star, or something that was equally blinding, was hovering right above that giant gorge, which even the king in that unleashed state took a second to adjust to. Still, as the king's perception enabled him to gaze past the blinding light, his awe intensified. An orderly, neatly arranged array of what looked like stylized reptilian eyes stretched left and right, illuminating the area and looking at the king. Khan hovered at the center of that array, his cold but intense expression carrying no trace of his previous casual demeanor. Even his eyes' blue light seemed to have changed, becoming somewhat domineering. That scene gave the king a hint of how vast Khan's existence truly was. Despite being flawed, Khan was indeed immense and worthy of being the Mana's champion. Yet, he still fell short of the true chaos god. "Please, endure the next beating for a while," Khan requested as he lifted his arm. "I have questions I want to ask later." The king heard Khan loud and clear but felt no insult in those arrogant words. Still, he didn't plan to go along with them, either, and his giant wings unfolded even more, almost becoming too wide, rectangular objects at his sides, ready for the imminent clash. As for Khan, he completely disregarded that preparation, his cold tone only conveying killing intent as he lowered his lifted arm and named his spell. 100 eyes. An unbearable light suddenly filled the world before slamming on the entirety of the king's existence. The stylized reptilian eyes released crackling beams of raw energy, and the king immediately understood that power wasn't his to absorb. That wasn't only about quantity. Theoretically, the king could absorb that amount of raw energy. However, the energy itself conveyed a different, unshakable, and unreasonable loyalty. It wanted to do Khan's raging bidding, accepting no other leader than that violent freedom. Of course, that wasn't enough to make the king retreat. He quickly folded his wings, condensing everything he had absorbed until then and his own energy into his physical figure, before slamming his arms forward, planning to oppose the incoming tide. Solid light slammed on the king's palms and washed all over him, burning his robe, cape, and flesh underneath. Even his fuming wings and horns receded under that destructive force. Still, the direct impact of the purple-red energy remained the most shocking detail. As soon as the king's palms touched that massive spell, he accepted a sad truth. He never had any chance to stop or delay it in the first place. The king lost his ethereal footing and flew back, dragged and burned by that raging tide of destructive, raw energy. Nevertheless, his body was tough and resisted the assault, amassing power to prepare for a counterattack. The blinding, raging tide prevented the king from stopping himself, so he forsook that goal, only focusing on regaining a modicum of control over his limbs and existence. His energy condensed inside him, ready to expand, only for something unfathomably heavy to slam on his belly. The king had closed his eyes to prepare that counterattack, but opened them to check what had happened. He was still in the middle of that raging river, burning while being partially blinded, but someone had joined him. Khan had landed on the king's powerless figure, his body and clothes seemingly immune to the raging energy washing over him. Still, something had also changed in him. A curious detail had broadened on Khan's face, strangely worrying the king more than any gargantuan display of power could. For some unknown reason, Khan was smiling, seemingly having the time of his life in that deadly situation. Chapter 1430, Power. Power was addicting. Power corrupted, but that wasn't the kind of trap Khan had fallen into. A hammer begged to be slammed. It was the sole purpose behind its existence. A rifle had to be fired to avoid accumulating dust and other hindrances that would make it stop functioning. In the same way, power had to be used. It was an intrinsic drive that went against merely leaving it to rot away and more. Khan's predicament was also deeper and more convoluted. He had spent years longer unaware of his hatred toward the very power that had made him one of the best warriors in the regulated universe, only for Lisa to fix that in his last battle. The fights on the Naxx home world obviously couldn't suffice to test that revolutionary change. Yeza had also been born in that period. Khan had even gotten rid of his nightmares, completed his mission, and had a war to consider. Khan's mind had never stopped being beyond full, preventing any meaningful introspection. Yet, an opponent that could endure his blows had finally arrived, providing the perfect opportunity to reach a simple but profound realization: he loved fighting. Of course, Khan didn't enjoy the blood, death, and killing. He actually sort of despised that aspect of the whole fighting field. Yet, the struggle, the sweat, the tensed-up muscles pushed to the extreme, and the wild, unrestrained urge to obliterate everything and everyone were things Khan couldn't help but love. Khan realized that was quite the conflicting sentiment, but he couldn't help but feel that way. Moreover, that conflict never truly managed to manifest itself during a fight because Khan loved nothing more than losing himself in it. He adored it when he could think of nothing but unleashing his hard-earned power freely, without worrying about anything else. Lisa was taking care of the survivors. The area had nothing worth preserving, so Khan could focus solely on fighting, on flowing according to his wild and extreme inclinations, ending up having the time of his life despite the gravity of the situation. That was a twisted mindset, but it was true to Khan's personality. If anything, it was a miracle the battle drive had stopped at that instead of turning into something darker after the life he had lived. Khan stood on the king's torso, smiling down at him while that river of raging energy washed him over. Except that the river was harmless to Khan. It looked like nothing more than a wild breeze that made his hair and cape flutter without damaging them. That chaos was his home, and he could swim freely through it. Then, another unfathomably heavy blow slammed on the king's torso. Khan had lowered his other leg, stomping on his opponent, flinging him down and out of the raging river. The king's fuming figure escaped the tide of violent energy, which looked like a blinding streak of light from the outside. His body was still recovering from the damage, and the second kick seemed to have hindered the process, leaving him temporarily powerless, but that couldn't last for long. Nevertheless, that powerlessness lasted long enough for the river to change. Its raging flow suddenly came to a halt, reversing in some areas to condense into a quite wide spot, recreating a scene the king had already seen. Khan reappeared high in the sky, his cape and hair still fluttering. Meanwhile, an array of stylized reptilian eyes had reformed behind him, only to release their raging energy at his gesture. Another blinding river slammed into the king, overwhelming him and trapping him in its raging currents, which damaged more of his figure. Of course, at that level, the actual concerning damage involved evolved warrior's existence. Still, each of Khan's attacks stretched far past the physical realm, inflicting deeper wounds that the king's body inevitably reflected. The tide of raw energy burned the king, but also eroded his very existence. He seemed to embody a black hole, but his pulling force shrank and waned with each second he spent inside those raging waves of light. The king's body reflected that damage in the form of cracks. His flesh didn't break anymore. It shattered as if it were a piece of glass that didn't release either blood or smoke. Those were lasting wounds that stretched to his very core, showcasing how effective Khan's assault had been. The king obviously couldn't let that stand. Despite Khan seemingly wielding superior power, the alien remained a shard of divinity, and losing in such a shameful manner would reflect poorly on his god. The power that the king had previously tried to accumulate was still there. His body, horns, and wings were shattering, but he forcefully broke the latter on purpose, making them release their energy. The wings exploded into a tide of true chaos that pushed away the raging river, partially annihilating it, partially depleting itself to grant the king some freedom. Still, the king didn't use that freedom to escape. Instead, His pulling force seemed to reverse, filling the released true chaos with newfound density and sending it upward. Khan's spell was indeed shockingly wide and powerful, but was also built upon a mere planet's energy. Evolved warriors at the king's level could surpass that. Actually, the king could very well treat a simple celestial body as nothing more than food. As if to prove the king right, the tide of true chaos managed to rise against the descending purple-red river, piercing through it like a sharp spear against a shallow waterfall. Yet, both the purple-red river and the tide of glowing darkness suddenly froze, seemingly to allow the passage of a single word. Break! A shout roared through the area, which the world obeyed. Both rivers abandoned their structural integrity and shattered into raw energy that quickly dispersed. The scenery became clear. The king's burned and cracked figure was deep inside the gargantuan cavity, Earth's sun's light still reaching those depths due to how wide it was. Meanwhile, Khan was hovering above the king, calmly walking down the air as if he were descending an invisible staircase. "You know," Khan announced, the symphony moving due to his silent command. "You called me son of the mana, then champion of the mana, but both are wrong." The energy the previous two spells had released into the world condensed again, following the rest of the area's symphony. Bright clouds formed inside the gargantuan cavity, summoning a storm in the very depths of that massive hole. "The mana did indeed give birth to countless iterations," Khan continued. "But, if we are talking about the general meaning, I might as well be the mana." Chapter 1431, Proficiency. The knack had spread the mana, creating countless iterations that differed from the original version. Some species were also born with it, drawing a clear separation from what that energy had once meant and been. Khan was no exception, but his situation was more complicated than that. On the one hand, Khan was probably the most glaringly different iteration. The knack had indeed tainted him directly, but his journey had led him to surpass the mana, evolving past it to avoid becoming a slave to his fated inheritance. The Great Old One's genes had added another immense layer to that separation. They were actually so meaningful that even Lisa had given up on classifying her husband. However, Khan had also inherited the mana's original version. His personal approach to the matter didn't change that truth, and his powers proved it. Khan had been able to enforce a level of control over the mana in general even before devouring the white azure sphere. That ability had only deepened after that ordained event. He could also taint others if he really put his mind into it, making him a new quasi-progenitor of that magical energy. In a way, Khan embodied the partial success in the mana's goal. He wasn't quite at the level of the true chaos god. Still, Khan had completed the mission, which counted for something. Despite the mana now only existing in countless different iterations, Khan was what that energy had planned to evolve into. He was its new, superior version. For all intents and purposes, Khan now was the mana, aiming to reach the same levels as the white azure spinning sphere. The king couldn't argue with that definition when that mass of crackling clouds shone above him. Khan couldn't order the true chaos around, but its energy had fallen under his control as soon as it shattered. The same went for the world's energy. Everything followed Khan's commands as if it were an extension of his body. He owned anything touched by his existence, and the reason for that was the same behind his ability to contend against the true chaos without employing special techniques. Control was a matter of will, and enforcing it required overcoming anything that opposed it, be it through actions or a desire too powerful to defend against. Khan had a great affinity with destruction, but freedom was his core. He was unbound, unshackled, and unrestrained, a stance he had spent decades achieving, and that could turn violent as soon as something tried to oppress him. The king saw it as clear as day. Khan's mana wouldn't be oppressed. His chaos wouldn't stand for restraints or limits. It would only do what he felt like, not caring for natural enemies and inborn weaknesses. All that was pushed to the extreme by the evident excitement on Khan's face, for he perfectly understood how the Thilku's emperor felt. He had finally found an opponent that wouldn't break so easily, so he would let loose until his victory inevitably arrived. The king wasn't ready to give up yet. Actually, that option didn't exist in his mind, but a destabilizing, heavy blow landed on his abdomen before he could muster anything. Khan had been descending the invisible staircase just a moment ago, only for another of him to materialize before the king, his leg already on his abdomen. The blow stopped the king in his tracks, only for something else to come after him. The clouds above released massive lightning bolts that converged in his position, slamming on something ethereal all around him. The lightning bolts stood still but kept raging, sending the destructive sparks forward, which left marks in the air before disappearing somewhere deeper. Meanwhile, more cracks opened on the king's body, reflecting that invisible damage. The lightning bolts were assaulting his pulling force, his very existence, eroding him on a level that should be impossible to touch for regular spells. Of course, Khan's spells were anything but normal, and the same went for their flexibility. His lightning bolts could inflict widespread and catastrophic damage, but could also be insidious, seeping into the king's existence to unleash their power. The king knew that he couldn't remain in that deadlock, but his body suddenly started shaking, the tremors locking him out of his connection with his power. "You guys seem to wield something resembling martial arts," Khan announced, his feet still attached to the king's abdomen, being the source of those strange tremors. "So, you might understand what I'm about to say." The tremors intensified without requiring any movement from Khan. Actually, something else arrived, pressing onto the king, seemingly trying to flatten his body. "My martial art is quite exceptional," Khan continued. "So exceptional that they had to split it into different forms to make mastering it bearable." Khan's foot suddenly pierced the king's abdomen by a mere centimeter. Still, that faint movement ended up carving a foot-shaped hole into the alien, which came out of his back and stretched far past his figure. "I'll spare you the talk about the proficiency level," Khan added. "Just know that my martial arts forms were meant for humans and what their bodies could tolerate." The Khan, who was still descending the staircase, disappeared, only for another copy to materialize on top of the king, standing on his shoulders. "But well," the second Khan said, shrugging his shoulders, "I don't really have such limits." The place where the foot had stabbed the king's abdomen enlarged from both ends, carving a vertical cut on his torso, almost severing him in half. "Now that I think about it," the first Khan said, tilting his head, "I actually have to go over the proficiency level." A series of heavy hits landed on the king's shoulder, released by the second Khan despite his lack of movement. To keep it short, there's novice, competent, advanced, and expert, both Khans explained simultaneously. "I reached expert quite recently, but my body can handle more, so I guess I'll just transcend that classification." The explanation seemed to have taken entire minutes, but the king knew everything was unfolding in the span of a fraction of a second. Khan was too fast, and his body as a whole seemed to bulge with monstrous power before he added his last line. "Let's see," Khan considered. "I'll call this new level embodiment." Chapter 1432, Theory. Something had become glaringly obvious ever since Khan had inherited the Great Old One's genes. Martial arts almost always took the backseat in the evolved realm, but Khan was in the very opposite situation. Khan's union between mana and might had opened the door to evolved versions of martial arts. His body's cells couldn't just keep up with his spells. They could surpass them, creating something stronger than both. Khan could settle for merely adjusting his martial arts to his new physical strength. After all, the transcendent step was incredible already, and his unique body had allowed him to master its 6 advanced forms in no time, something that no one had ever done. Yet, that would be a waste of Khan's potential. He could do much more with his fusion of might and mana, but the guidelines ended there. Adding his cell's power to the equation had already been uncharted territory, and expanding it further would require time and enlightenment. Enlightenment Khan had obtained while absorbing the white azure sphere. The crumbles of knowledge from the mana's heart that had stayed with Khan resonated with his very existence. They had stuck because his being was already inclined toward those fields and could accept them. Nothing about that involved his unique cells, but he could fill the blanks. The how had been easy enough to find, too. Khan only had to look at why evolved warriors ended up focusing on spells after stepping into that superior status. They had to express their existence to convey their full power. Those techniques embodied them, so Khan would do the same with his martial arts. A mess of countless strands of mana clashed inside Khan's body, generating an unfathomable amount of energy in the process. That was far more than what the individual advanced forms required, but Khan kept going, filling himself to the brim and going even further. The same reaction that had surprised Lisa on the Naxx home world seemed about to replay itself. Khan's muscles bulged, almost about to bloat past their structural limits, only for his cells to devour all that raging energy, turning it into physical prowess. That would have normally emptied Khan's body of mana, but more of that energy refilled the now empty flesh, repeating the process until he felt on the verge of exploding. When Khan's cells and flesh were full of physical might and mana, he forcefully stabilized his state, making it his new normality. He now had all the energy and strength possible at his disposal, achieving the utmost peak that his attunement level could allow, unlocking something the transcendent step didn't include in its theory. The 6 advanced forms were separated for reasons that didn't only involve physical limits. The energy required to unleash a single one of them was enough to make most evolved warriors' legs explode. Still, those violent strands of mana also had to move in a specific pattern, demanding immense concentration. However, Khan could now hold far more energy than necessary, and his cells and enlightenment could simplify the required control, allowing him to use multiple advanced forms simultaneously. 6 different events had unfolded around and onto the king in the span of a fraction of a second. Everything had been so fast that the world had yet to record those massive effects, but time kept flowing, eventually making the alien experience them. The tremors that severed the king from his power made his flesh explode. His body flattened under the ethereal but unbearable weight, and the hole that connected his abdomen with his back finally started to hurt. The vertical wound on the king's torso also expanded and deepened, reaching the other side to open it, severing his neck from his shoulder to create a V-shaped cavity that reached his waist. Instead, the hits that landed on the king's shoulders pushed him down, leaving dents and cracks on his skin and glowing smoke still escaping his injuries. The king shot deeper into the cavity, only to stop, noticing that his terrible predicament had yet to end. Somehow, 3 Khans had materialized around him, and their legs were already on his body, unleashing another round of those incredible attacks. The exchange flung the king down again, but his body stopped once more, this time by 2 Khans, who replicated that overwhelming offensive, trapping him in it. After the 5th time enduring that assault, the king stopped trying to oppose it. He simply couldn't. Khan's attacks had already landed before he could even try to muster energy for a counterattack. Moreover, the bright clouds above had never stopped releasing lightning bolts, which raged right inside the king's existence while following his descent. He grew weaker with each exchange, his now unavoidable defeat getting closer by the second. Despite wielding a shard of the true Chaos God's divinity, the king was powerless to do anything meaningful against Khan. However, he felt no shame anymore. One of his attacks had partially worked, and that was enough to confirm one unmistakable truth. Khan was strong, but he wouldn't be able to do anything against the true Chaos God. The experiment had been praiseworthy but ultimately pointless. As the king's body shattered, another smile formed on his cracked face. He knew without a shadow of a doubt that the universe of mana was done for. That single defeat wouldn't change anything. His god would devour that inferior energy and reach even higher peaks, reigning supreme. The king's legs eventually vanished, followed by the left side of his torso. The cracks on his face widened when what was left of his back crashed into something solid, and his eyelids broke as he tried to open them, putting him before a chilling blue glow. Khan had stopped his unending and overbearing assault when what was left of the king had landed on the gargantuan cavity's bedrock. His glowing eyes shone on the wisps of black smoke still trying to create horns, but they were too faint and weak to claim his attention for long. "I have a theory I want you to confirm," Khan revealed. "The guys I fought, those things fighting in the city, and you seem to have watered-down versions of the true chaos." The king didn't answer. He could hear Khan clearly but spent those last seconds inspecting him, rejoicing even more at the flaws he spotted. "You especially only revealed your actual power after your god's permission," Khan continued. "It makes me think that there's no true chaos or god. They are one and the same." Khan lifted his hand, and a thunderous noise resounded from far above him, sending a relatively small lightning bolt into his grasp. Meanwhile, Khan added, "You a glorified knack with a more defined power structure. Maybe your god personally created or modified you in his image to give birth to better avatars." Khan lowered the lightning bolt and pointed it at the king's cracked face, its soul-blinding halo already threatening to kill the dying alien. "So, how close am I?" Khan asked. The king had never stopped smiling, and seeing the lightning bolt broadened that expression. His head snapped up, leaving black shards on the bedrock to make the crackling spell pierce his forehead. Khan could have retracted the lightning bolt, but didn't. An opponent willing to kill himself wouldn't talk anyway, but the king did add something while what was left of his figure finished shattering. "You will never be a god," the king said, exhaling his last breath before crumbling into dust that left no trace of his previous existence. "Loyal until the end," Khan sighed, lifting the lightning bolt to scratch his head with it. "Did he even know that I refused to become a god just hours ago?" Chapter 1433, Problems. Khan's casual mood waned as his body relaxed, making room for the more serious topics that battle had highlighted. The wild bursts of mana caused by the clash of different strands of energy exited Khan's body, behaving like purple-red steam that blew out of his figure. Khan's cells also relaxed, his muscles losing their burlier state to return him to his still muscular but leaner form. Even the lightning bolt in his hand disappeared as he flexed his arms and stretched left and right, holding back a groan at the faint soreness he experienced. That slight discomfort was short-lived, but Khan didn't ignore it. Despite his incredible body, enforcing that full and powerful state had consequences he had to account for. On the outside, the technique had looked easy, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Khan had basically forced his body to reach its physical limits while also replacing his mana with the wilder energy released by applying the transcendent steps theory. Anyone but Khan would have exploded, suffered crippling injuries, or gone mad at the level of mental control required to keep the technique active, let alone actually using it as the foundation of attacks. Yet, Khan had come out of it with virtually no side effects, knowing he would need that improvised technique again. He couldn't use his martial arts' new proficiency level without it, and that ability would probably be necessary in the battles to come. The reason for that obviously had something to do with the empty spot at the gargantuan cavity's bottom that Khan's eyes had never stopped shining upon. Khan had more in store and planned to get even stronger, but the king had indeed forced him to fight seriously, at least partially. That didn't bode well at all, especially since that single victory didn't speak for the entirety of the invasion. The Scarlet Eyes kings were stronger than Khan could have predicted, and that problem had no solution. The mutagen could smooth out some details, but no magical fixes existed. The regulated universe had to fight fire with fire, and Khan wasn't sure it had enough evolved warriors at that level. Of course, the Thilku's Emperor was a nice silver lining, but the math still looked grim. Khan didn't know how big the Scarlet Eyes army was, but something told him his side was outnumbered, especially when it came to those superior evolved warriors. The invasion as a whole was about to vouch for that point. Khan had yet to reconnect with his forces and receive a proper briefing, but could guess how the other attacks had gone. Except for his specific fight, all the other assaults must have ended in his side's defeat. If I kill the god, Khan considered, will the true chaos lose power, or will one of the kings rise to replace him? Khan temporarily ignored what killing the true chaos god actually entailed to review his previous guess. Theoretically, if the god were that energy, killing him would remove it, or at least significantly weaken it. However, the god might have a failsafe in place, especially with the king's claims about his partial divinity. Something told Khan that going for the head to get the war done quickly wouldn't be easy or straightforward, and that even before accounting for the god's actual strength. The crackling, bright clouds in the middle of the gargantuan cavity kept raging. At the same time, Khan disappeared from the bedrock, reappearing above it and the quadrant's surface, his gaze inevitably sweeping over the damage he had caused. What had once been a vast, radioactive desert had now gained a bottomless, immense gorge that expanded as far as the eye could see. Khan had even partially held back to allow Lisa to set up proper defenses, and because he didn't need to go all out, but the quadrant's topography had still drastically changed forever. That was the level of power that war demanded, and Khan knew no planet could endure it. The catastrophic consequences would be on par with or worse than what the first impact had caused, making finding a suitable battlefield a problem Khan didn't know how to solve. Khan then managed to divert his gaze from the gargantuan cavity, looking in the opposite direction, only to spot more problems of a different nature. Aina was pretty much gone. The reinforcements seemed to have finished vanquishing those strange, fuming monsters, but the damage was done. The casualties were uncountable, and that battle was bound to become a permanent scar in Earth's history. Also, Khan couldn't exactly ignore some of the survivors. He still had to hear George's briefing, question Rodney, who had surprisingly joined the fight for some reason, and address Monica properly. She deserved far more than that brief greeting, no matter how guilty Khan felt. Colonel Norrit and Major General Ongen would be easy enough to handle, but Khan needed to see where they stood. After all, they were his force's first evolved warriors, and they had the potential to grow even stronger. Khan actually believed the latter could touch upon the king's realm, too. Khan also couldn't forget how he had left a monster and his 4 eccentric guards in orbit. The king's defeat had probably quelled the emperor's eagerness to land, but he would have to get down eventually. His presence would be necessary in the unavoidable and impending political meeting. Because a political meeting was bound to happen, now more than ever. The regulated universe could turn a blind eye to distant, vague threats, but the invasion had occurred within its borders. Every species had been hit. The Scarlet Eyes couldn't be more real, so the time for proper interspecies alliances had arrived. Still, among all that, Khan could only think about reuniting with his daughter and getting a decent night of sleep. He could finally do that. He had spent 23 years fighting for that, but the universe prevented him from enjoying that victory. In response to Khan's sour mental state, the distant, ethereal dome vanished, only for a white light to shine at his side. Lisa materialized in the air, standing on ice crystals, but limiting herself to an understanding, slightly chilling look. Lisa was willing to take Khan away if he really needed that break. After all, her loyalty lay with her family. The universe would wait if she said so. Yet, Khan stretched his right arm toward Lisa, and she shot a helpless glance at him before taking his hand, making their tattoos match as they headed back to what was left of Aina. Chapter 1434, Wrong Answer. The big, diverse platoon had ended up vanquishing the bloated-backed monsters before Khan could finish his battle. After all, they were better equipped elite warriors, and their opponents seemed to stand at the bottom of the Scarlet Eyes food chain. Defeating the bloated-backed monsters didn't solve that predicament. Technology still didn't work, and the limited experimental fuel Khan's forces had managed to produce after obtaining Rodney's sample had to be split carefully, leaving little of it for evacuation vehicles. Nevertheless, the evacuation proceeded. Part of the platoon took care of filling and moving the few available vehicles away, while other soldiers dealt with securing a defensive perimeter. A last group of soldiers headed for where Monica's jeep had stopped, only to discover that everything was being taken care of. That partial resolution allowed the soldiers to focus on something else, especially those in the last 2 groups. The violent shockwaves resounding in the distance remained too eye-catching despite the defensive dome. A battle between monstrous entities was unfolding deep into the desert, and everyone's fate seemed to depend on its outcome. That truth was clear to the frightened citizens, too, driving many to want to evacuate as soon as possible. Yet, few of them ended up gazing past the white dome, almost falling into a trance as they prayed for their side's champion to come out victorious. The announcement didn't come in any drastic or dramatic way. Silence did indeed spread into the distance, but the soldiers and citizens understood who had won only when the technology all around the remaining blocks resumed functioning. The generators resumed sending energy throughout the surviving streets, buildings, and defensive walls. Artificial illumination, banners, and menus lit up as sizzling noises resounded from the broken and destroyed areas. Even a few crashed vehicles turned on, announcing the Mana's victory. Tenuous, timid excitement spread as more and more people noticed those changes happening all around the surviving blocks. Still, that feeling exploded into roaring cries and chants when 2 unmistakable figures appeared in the distance, walking down the sky to approach those areas. Of course, the unmistakable part was mostly due to the blue light one of the 2 figures radiated. That glow had almost become iconic on the network, declaring a clear winner. The cheering intensified as a few warriors from the big platoon advanced, planning to greet the descending figures at their targeted landing spot. The respective leaders of that diverse team shot through the desert, reaching Monica's group, and Khan couldn't help but recognize them. Lord Rsi of the Thilku Empire, Nikri of the Skalka, Talixikpali of the Efi, and Lieutenant Deister or Balway had been the ones in charge of those reinforcements for obvious reasons, and Khan was pleased to see that they were all in the 5th level now. Despite Khan being the main attraction, the white-haired figure holding his hand claimed a fair share of attention. Lisa had been to Karavis, but her stay there had been short, preventing her from meeting all the key members of Khan's force. That meeting could have happened under better circumstances, but Lisa didn't shy away from it. Her face radiated its usual cold and detached vibes while staring down at the group, but unmistakable pride also reverberated inside them. Earlier, the situation had been too messy to allow any meaningful inspection, especially from the 4 team leaders. Still, nothing could stop the group from assessing Lisa in terms of simple beauty and power now, leading to a clear conclusion. Lisa wasn't only the second most powerful warrior currently in the desert. She also matched Khan in ways the audience couldn't really explain but couldn't doubt, either. Those two belonged together. Actually, they were already one. Khan stopped his descent when he was a few meters above the group. Other soldiers were still converging toward that position, planning to join their respective leaders and witness the scene firsthand. Still, Khan's inquisitive, piercing gaze forced everyone to freeze, as if he had uttered a silent order. Then, Khan let go of Lisa's hand, only to slam his fist on his chest. Needless to say, the Skulker who saw the gesture exploded in a joint battle cry that evolved into rhythmical stomps and fists on their chests. That renewed excitement affected the other team leaders and their respective soldiers. Lord RSI performed a traditional bow with his cape, which the Thilku who had joined the scene echoed. Lieutenant Deister rolled his eyes but followed that trend, performing a stiff military salute, which the soldiers behind him imitated. As for Talixic Pali and the Fuefi on the scene, they limited themselves to neutral bows. Even if in such a numerically small fashion, those soldiers waved Khan's flag. They belonged to his force or core of his interspecies alliance, featuring some of the most elite warriors he had access to. The chants went on for a minute, then for 2. They seemed ready to continue for days, mostly due to the Skulker's unending excitement, but something managed to put an end to such deserved celebrations. A trace of synthetic mana touched the edge of Khan's perception, moving his gaze in a direction he didn't expect reinforcements to arrive from, especially in such large numbers. A small fleet of black military human ships appeared on the horizon on Khan's left, rapidly getting closer to his location, only to land on the sand a few hundred meters from him. Various soldiers jumped off the military ships, wearing tidy uniforms that highlighted their warrior level and wielding firearms. Nevertheless, Khan only looked at the 4 figures that soon led that small company forward, recognizing them all. One man was rather young, with long blonde hair and a bright face. He was Brigadier General Joseph Seacombe, the former youngest general in humankind's history before Rodney stole that title. Khan had dealt directly with him more than once before leaving those matters to his uncle and Colonel Norrit. Another man was quite old, but his firm steps and straight back conveyed nothing but strength, which the 5 stars on each of his shoulders deepened. He was Major General Creasel, whom Khan had never met personally, but whom his family had long suspected to be behind the battle against General Medri. Actually, it was more than a suspicion. Raymond himself had leaked clues about that secret collaboration, almost making that old general's involvement in the event that had ultimately pushed Khan away from the global army a certainty. Raymond obviously was an unreliable informant, but Brigadier General Seacombe and Rodney seemed to have brought additional clues that ultimately confirmed the news. Of course, Khan was behind more than a few briefings, but the Major General's aura was quite telling about his overall hostile stance toward him. The other 2 leaders, a man and a woman, were also old and of a similar status, but Khan couldn't remember the names. He only knew they were generals from the occasional sightings on the network. Still, their respective 5 pairs of stars made them relatively inconsequential to that war. The situation immediately turned tense, with Khan's forces glaring at the incoming company. Yet, the 4 incoming generals opted for a polite approach, stopping at some distance from the group to perform joint and orderly military salutes. It seemed that Khan's decision to sever ties with humankind wouldn't exempt him from those formalities and the respect his power and actions deserved. Still, politeness didn't imply peacefulness, especially since Khan was involved. Prince Khan, Major General Creasel called, being the first to break his military salute and step forward, placing himself before his fellow generals. Allow me to express the global army's gratitude for your prompt intervention. Your help saved countless lives. Khan didn't answer. He limited himself to staring at the general and his 3 companions, seemingly emotionless. The event was scary enough, but Lisa worsened it, adding her chilling glow to that silent inspection. Her distrust was evident for everyone to see, filling the 4 leaders with anxiety. Humankind is willing to host a negotiation table with whomever force you are willing to bring, Prince Khan, Major General Creasel continued, hoping his polite words could improve that mood. Your troops trespassing will obviously be ignored. Actually, the global army owes you. Khan's organization didn't belong to humankind, so his soldiers' arrival on Earth was technically unsanctioned. Khan didn't know the details and honestly didn't care. Those matters were too small for someone at his level anyway. Why did the global army send reinforcements only now? Khan ended up asking. Why didn't it send evolved warriors even now? Major General Kreisel half expected that question, but dodging it was easy enough. After all, the prince couldn't inquire about foreign political matters, and Rodney Semmet technically counted as humankind's reinforcements anyway. I'm afraid our technology didn't allow it, Prince Khan, Major General Kreisel spouted a blatant lie. We attempted everything we could, but ultimately failed. Our evolved warriors were deployed far away, so that problem affected their arrival, too. The technological malfunction caused by the true chaos was a perfect excuse. It didn't justify the current absence of the global army's evolved warriors, but Major General Kreisel knew that politics would compel Khan to accept that explanation. Still, the general miscalculated, failing to realize that Khan wasn't playing politics anymore. Wrong answer, Khan uttered, and some discomfort invaded Major General Kreisel, making him frown before his whole figure crumbled into a puddle of gory shards. Chapter 1435, Martial Law. Major General Kreisel did nothing wrong. He didn't insult Khan nor try to be impolite. His stance had been completely welcoming despite the political limitations of the interspecies treaties and his status. Yet, the general had also lied, opting to play politics, and that couldn't fly with Khan. It couldn't anymore since the regulated universe was beyond those rules now. War had descended, so everything had changed, especially Khan. Everyone knew each species in the joint alliance would have tried to resort to strategies to salvage assets and benefit from the war. That was normal political behavior with a hint of self-preservation. Nothing could have stopped it from happening, but Khan could now showcase the consequences of such decisions. The rulebook had changed. Politics could work in peaceful times, but a war that put the entire regulated universe at risk demanded strength. It also needed a streamlined chain of command and powerful leaders, which those generals weren't. Of course, human evolved warriors without the mutagen wouldn't have been able to do much against the Scarlet Eyes, but that didn't matter. Khan only cared about the fact that the global army was trying to play games despite the dire situation, so he took a clear stance. A 5th-level warrior was what most saw as an apex soldier since the evolved figures were too rare and detached from the public view to deserve any meaningful consideration from the masses. Major General Kreisel also wielded one of the highest obtainable ranks within the global army, which basically acted as a political shield against any serious repercussions against his persona. However, none of that stopped Khan from turning the general into a gory puddle of body pieces and torn rags. He had willed it, and the general had died, showcasing how brittle a 5th-level warrior was in his presence. The generally accepted concept of life seemed to lose meaning when figures of Khan's caliber were involved, and the remaining generals and human soldiers couldn't immediately adjust to what that implied. They could only freeze in fear, knowing they were at the mercy of that bright-eyed monster. Khan didn't immediately speak again but moved as if his previous action had been inconsequential and trivial. He had committed murder, breaking countless laws, which his status aggravated, but no one dared to point that out as he hovered toward the company and its remaining 3 leaders. The 3 generals couldn't help but hold their breath when Khan landed on the sand before them. His bright eyes didn't even browse over them, but focused on the only woman in the group, applying an indescribable pressure to the core of her very being. Khan wasn't alone there. Lisa had followed him, stopping a few steps behind him, but conveying far clearer animosity. Her white glow cast a chilling sensation over the area, lowering the temperature throughout the company. That wasn't even the end. Khan's action served as an order for his soldiers in the area. Those diverse, elite warriors all stared coldly at the 3 generals and their troops, showing willingness to attack them at the first sign of conflict. Why didn't the global army send evolved warriors? Khan asked, repeating his previous question, seemingly wanting to go over the generals one by one. The female general couldn't even attempt to reply under that multi-layered pressure. A lie seemed to lead to death, and any justification, no matter how nuanced and reasonable, still fell in that category. As for the truth, it was worse than any lie. Everyone had silently understood it, but the female general couldn't voice it. She didn't want to anger Khan any further, and her duties prevented her from sharing it in the first place. Luckily for the female general, the area had someone who somewhat understood how Khan's brain worked. Brigadier General Seacombe stepped forward, his shoes splashing on the bloody puddle that had once been Major General Creasel, while he reaffirmed his military salute. The global army wanted to gather data before risking its evolved assets, Brigadier General Seacombe announced, revealing the truth everyone had long since become aware of. That hindrance in Khan's questioning didn't seem to bother him. He looked at Brigadier General Seacombe, putting pressure on him. So, Khan exclaimed, did the global army want to use my troops as cannon fodder? And guinea pigs, Brigadier General Seacombe confirmed before recalling to add something else. Prince Khan. The other two generals would have shocked glares at Brigadier General Seacombe if they were brave enough to move freely in Khan's presence. After all, that revelation seemed to have set the deaths in stone, but the very opposite happened. War has come, Khan declared. Our side of the universe can't risk hindering its necessary cooperation over these ploys. Establish martial law and get me a proper representative. Khan had no authority over humankind. He had no right to tell the global army what to do. However, no one dared to contradict Khan as he turned and walked away from the company. Even the usually overzealous Rodney, when it came to those matters, remained silent, partially happy the global army had lost a political opponent he considered unworthy of leading humankind. But, Khan suddenly spoke again, not stopping his slow return to his troops. I'll accept the suggestion. We'll have a negotiation table right here. That was mostly a technicality for Khan. After all, the Thilku Emperor was already in orbit, and he was the most troublesome existence to move. Meanwhile, everyone else could teleport to Earth, and the barren, destroyed desert had nothing valuable anymore. It was the perfect place to host the kind of meeting Khan had in mind. Of course, the area had to be cleared first, so Khan nodded at his diverse 14 leaders, who understood the silent order and led their troops away. They also dragged the doctors with them, planning to resume and complete the evacuation. The human company remained still throughout that deployment, almost earning itself a glare from Khan, but Rodney ended up stepping it up. He had fully recovered, so he crossed Khan without saying a word, approaching the three generals to make them help with the evacuation effort. As the only two available evolved warriors in the area, Colonel Norrit and Major General Arngen left to offer superior support to their soldiers. Soon, only Khan, George, Lisa, and Monica remained, but that didn't last long. Lisa stepped forward without saying a word, quickly reaching Monica and placing her cold hand on her shoulder. White light immediately shone from the two women, who disappeared in the next second, making Khan sigh and earning him a derisive smirk from George. Chapter 1436, Playmates. Khan wanted to heave another sigh at George's smirk, but ended up peeking past his shoulder, looking at the distant, gargantuan cavity, knowing Lisa had teleported there with Monica. As for what Lisa had in mind, Khan could guess and sense it through the mental connection, but was also powerless to affect it. That private meeting had to happen, and now was the perfect chance. Khan also knew his turn would come next. Khan eventually lowered his gaze, faint guilt trying to rise into his mind, only for him to push it away as he slowly sat on the sand at George's side. The two men didn't say anything for a while, limiting themselves to staring at the distant horizon and the white desert's chaotic state. Khan and George hadn't seen each other in over 3 years, with their interactions during that period boiling down to a single call and a few messages, and much had inevitably changed. The changes were even greater when Khan considered where he and George had started. They had been nothing more than two promising young soldiers during Istrone's rebellion. Still, that tragedy had marked the beginning of a beautiful friendship that had long evolved into proper brotherhood. Truth be told, Khan saw George as more of a family member than his actual relatives. They had known each other for so long, basically growing together through an untold number of meaningful events, culminating in their current status. Khan was Khan, while George had become his family's patriarch. Those achievements would have been unthinkable when their lives were just about drinking, girlfriends, and survival, but there they were. Things were far simpler back then, but neither regretted where they had ended up. Patriarch Ildu, Khan said with evident mocking intentions. He had learned about that by mistake and only recently, and couldn't help but mention it now. In my defense, George exclaimed, I was against it. They basically begged me to do it. For all your big talks, Khan uttered, you could never stop yourself from rising to the occasion when the situation demanded it. I won't hear this stuff from someone who regressed to a pubescent boyfriend as soon as he heard Lisa's name, George snorted. Wow, pubescent, Khan joked. We are learning words proper to our new status, aren't we? Shut up, married man, George scolded. I would have won multiple fortunes if I had gambled on what you would have done at the arranged marriage. Well, Khan sighed, I really tried to run away and remain unhappy, but you know how Nichols are. Lisa called for me, and I couldn't think about anything else. At least I won't hear your whining about your hot girlfriends wanting to nurse you into happiness anymore, George pointed out. Oh no, those days are gone, Khan confirmed. It took overcoming a universal curse, getting married, having a daughter, and multiple threats to my manhood, but I'm good now. Sounds like the average day in the infamous Prince Khan's life, George announced, breaker of countless hearts, pursuer of high-level booties, and destined savior of basically everything. You know Lisa will kill you if she hears that, right? Khan wondered. You'll lose your dick first, George commented. She wants more children, Khan revealed, so that's safe for now. Well, she talked about taking it away and only giving it back when it's needed, but part of me still hopes she was joking. Khan and George exchanged a glance at that point, instantly understanding each other. She wasn't joking, George said. Not at all, Khan admitted. I'm lucky I'm such a paragon of virtue. Khan and George fell silent, remaining in that mutual glance, until both their expression cracked into smiles, leading to loud laughter. Still, George didn't forget that congratulations were in order. The separation hadn't allowed those, especially not in a meaningful way, but the time had come. Khan, George said, stopping laughing while placing a hand on Khan's shoulders. Congratulations, you got your girl in the end. Unlike almost everyone else, George knew how meaningful Lisa had been for Khan. The entire network was aware of that, but George had actually witnessed it. George also knew how Khan was. Despite being happy about him doing his best to enjoy his life, approving of his relationship with Monica, and even being friends with her, George had always been aware that Lisa held an irreplaceable place in his heart. It only took one look at Khan to confirm that idea. George almost couldn't remember the last time he had seen him so happy and at ease. Sure, a lot more had happened and changed, but Lisa had to be the main reason behind Khan's current state. Moreover, George couldn't forget his shameful request during one of his last meetings with Khan. The Scarlet Eyes threat was far from over, but seeing Khan back in one piece, happy, and stronger beyond reason did fill George with gratitude and reassurance. My daughter is due soon. George changed the topic since that exchange of gazes was becoming too emotional. She'll be your daughter's peer. We have to make sure they become playmates. Apparently, Khan said, diverting his gaze, feeling slightly awkward. My daughter inherited my flying and somehow rode snow, too. I'll have to get back to you on how dangerous she might be for your daughter, or your entire family. George blinked in disbelief, that feeling deepening when he noticed a tinge of pride in Khan's awkward expression. He didn't even know how Snow fit in all that, highlighting how much the two had to go through to catch up. Khan was in the same situation. He had only seen George's son in pictures, and there he was, talking about having a daughter soon. Nothing marked the passage of time more than their kids, but Khan had something else he wanted to talk about first. How did you even end up fighting here? Khan asked, his tone conveying the more serious nature of his question. I thought you were out. I wanted to show off one last time before you arrived and stole all the attention, George joked. Well, someone ended up stealing the spotlight anyway. Khan arched his eyebrows in surprise, vaguely connecting mental dots, but his confusion deepened when he noticed the slight struggle on George's face. I'll tell you what happened, George announced, avoiding Khan's bright gaze on purpose. Just, don't get into your protective killing mood until I'm finished. Chapter 1437, Decision. One of the most shocking stories Khan had ever heard reached his ears, confusing him so much that he was unsure how to feel about it. Khan had picked up clues during the previous short interactions, but the whole truth turned out to be far more surprising than he could have ever predicted. To make things worse, Khan didn't know what he found more shocking. Rodney hadn't only saved George's life twice. He also seemed to be serious about Monica. Normally, Khan would dismiss that as Rodney's plotting. He was that kind of asset in the end, capable but extremely annoying, which Khan would usually straighten out with one of his threats. However, the details George disclosed went against that bias. For all the loud, annoying words, Rodney truly seemed to value George's life more than his own and did indeed harbor genuine feelings for Monica. Those revelations forced Khan to consider the topic seriously. Theoretically, Monica was her own woman, and Khan couldn't have anything to say in her life anymore. Yet, she remained one of the closest people to his heart, so he wanted what was best for her. Did he really say that you have more to lose? Khan couldn't help but ask. I'm as shocked as you are, George nodded. And what about that spell with Monica's face? Khan questioned. Are you sure you weren't drunk? I wish I were drunk now, George sighed. It would be easier to process all this. Khan mimicked George's sigh as memories inevitably rose through his brain. Rodney's sins boiled down to his actions on Nighties and Milia 222. He had betrayed the Nichols during the worst crisis they had ever faced, attempting to kill Khan in the process, only to try to do the same in the lawless zone. Still, the problem with Nighties wasn't really about Rodney's actions but with his reactions. Falling prey to that monster's hypnotic ability hadn't been his fault. That lay with how he had tried to cover his tracks to salvage his reputation. Yet, Nighties was over 10 years ago. The human training camp there only had elite recruits, but recruits nonetheless. Almost everyone was a clueless kid with no real experience in crises. What had happened remained bad, but people made all kinds of mistakes when they panicked. As for the attempted murder on Milia 222, it was undoubtedly bad, but who hadn't tried that? Khan's own family had plotted to remove him from the picture, only to become the greatest sponsor behind his current position. It honestly was something Khan could look past quite easily, especially since proper changes in character seemed to have happened. At the end of the day, if Raymond Kobsen could become an ally, anyone could. I really don't want to think about this, Khan groaned, pushing those thoughts aside. It's Monica's decision to make, if my wife doesn't kill either of them first. My wife, George repeated, wanting to mock Khan, only to find him smirking proudly at him, appearing barely able to contain his happiness. Could you be more obvious? George ended up cursing. What am I even saying? You were ready to tie the knot as a kid already. You still got married before me, Khan pointed out. But I have the decency to complain about it, George snorted, spreading his arms to highlight his torn shirt. Look at how heroic I have to act to get some proper under the sheets action and drink in peace. Khan's glowing eyes darted up and down, inspecting George's white shirt, but his gaze obviously went far deeper than that. Rodney had been the most shocking detail in George's story, but Khan didn't ignore the additional data about the Scarlet Eye's army's structure and prowess. George's conclusions aligned with Khan's, creating quite the complete picture, but something else stood out, too. George had been able to fight the true Chaos Warriors on equal footing while being on the 5th level. His great potential was evident for everyone to see. Have you looked into your evolution yet? Khan wondered, moving to more serious topics. With me and Lisa here, yours should be quite smooth. Khan felt quite confident in that. George already was an elite among elites, so he would probably be able to step into the evolved realm on his own, without needing external help. However, Khan was now a different kind of entity, something far superior to what he had once been. He knew he could affect other people's evolutions to some extent, removing certain dangers. Still, what would elate most soldiers had the opposite effect on George. He diverted his gaze, looking at the white sand under him, a mixture of shame, internal conflict, and resolve invading his expression. If the sword becomes my whole life, George muttered, if I become a sword, what will happen to my family? Khan didn't need additional questions to understand George. He was at a crossroads, the same crossroads almost every warrior had to face before considering the evolution. That very crossroads was what had forced Monica to break up with Khan. It was what had made the 10-year separation between Khan and Lisa necessary, and George hesitated to pay the price it demanded. Actually, the hesitation was long gone. Khan could read on George's face how he had already made up his mind. Okay, Khan said, glancing at the horizon. No need to revolve. I'll take care of things. I'm sorry, Khan, George sighed. I'm not like you. I have a choice. It's not like you were a crucial part of my battle strategy anyway, Khan reassured, shrugging his shoulders. I mean, you were good, but you are more of a family man than a swordsman now. Ouch, George complained. I know you were jealous I picked Anita over you, but that was low. Both Khan and George ended up chuckling, shaking their heads, restoring their vague inspection of the mess in the distance and the horizon past it. Still, Khan felt the need to add something while the serious mood had yet to wane. I would have chosen this even if my life were different, Khan revealed, raising a hand to release a tinge of purple-red mana. I enjoy this too much not to pursue it. George spotted details he hadn't seen on Khan's face since his first flights with Snow while he inspected his own mana. The scene deepened George's earlier conclusion, broadening a genuine smile. Took you long enough, George jokingly scolded. What? Khan frowned, dismissing his mana and spreading his arms. Did everyone but me know about this? You have always been quite expressive, George commented. I was not, Khan scoffed, throwing his head back to look at the sky. I used to be such a good liar. Even Martha disagrees with that, George teased. What is she even doing these days? Khan wondered. Please, tell me that at least she remained normal. I guess training with Skalka, Fe, and Thilku is normal for your standards, George responded, leading to more stories Khan had missed out on while he had been busy with his crazy life. Chapter 1438, Friends. The mood was very different inside the gargantuan gorge, and had been like that as soon as a white light shone at its bottom. Monica was only a 4th-level warrior who wasn't even battle-oriented. Her family had educated her in those matters, but politics had always been her specialty. She had also stopped working out in recent years, mainly focusing on her duties as a member of Khan's inner circle. Meanwhile, Lisa was Lisa. She had been able to face the Scarlet Eyes Scouts as a 5th-level warrior without the mutagen, so her power was on a completely different level now that she had evolved. In short, Monica was powerless to do anything against Lisa. She didn't even realize a teleport had unfolded until she inspected her new location, which made the event undeniable. The white sand had disappeared, replaced by a dark brown bedrock. The sunlight had also stopped shining down on the area, replaced by a brighter and noisier star. The loud, crackling noises that reached Monica's ears made her cut the inspection of her surroundings short to look up. Purple-red clouds were raging above her, creating a storm in the middle of that immense cavity, seemingly ready to unleash a natural calamity. The sight was frightening and alarming, especially since Monica couldn't possibly fail to spot the connection between that iconic color and Khan. He had created that lasting, raging mark in the quadrant, showing how far he had gotten. The bright cloud actually helped Monica realize the difference better. Her knowledge in those fields wasn't great, so profound explanations that relied on alien terminology wouldn't have brought any meaningful understanding. Instead, a portable lightning storm that refused to disperse worked perfectly in that regard. Khan had become able to change a quadrant's weather. Monica couldn't even include him in her concept of life anymore. As breathtaking as the sight was, something closer and far more piercing soon attracted Monica's attention, making her lower her gaze toward the second source of light in that unfathomably deep gorge. Lisa had teleported with Monica, and her white eyes had remained fixed on her. Her light enveloped Monica, trapping her in a piercing cold that almost sent shivers down her back. The experience was far from comfortable, and the more private situation made Monica drop any attempt to put on a strong front. Yet, Lisa soon diverted her glowing gaze to inspect the clouds above, sparing Monica from more seconds in that chilling inspection. My husband can summon this with but a thought, Lisa announced. He actually held back for yours and everyone else's sake. This quadrant wouldn't exist anymore otherwise. Monica immediately understood what Lisa was trying to do, but her words hit home nonetheless. Khan now belonged to a different and unreachable world. Monica had to accept that truth and give up on him completely. Nevertheless, Monica had already done that. A part of her would always love Khan, but she had broken up with him because she had long since realized that truth. Monica would have only held Khan back, and he would have accepted that sacrifice because he was a selfless idiot. He married you, Monica responded. You gave him a child. I wouldn't assume to know you, but we are both aware that no other woman will exist in his eyes now. Lisa lowered her gaze, enveloping Monica in her white light again, only for it to be less uncomfortable now. Yet, Lisa's hand also snapped forward, trapping Monica's face in her cold grasp. "You are the only other woman my husband ever loved," Lisa declared, her grasp relaxing, only for her cold fingers to caress Monica's face. "I do love you for bringing him respite when I couldn't, but I also hate you for all the guilt you made him carry." That last part actually wasn't entirely on Monica. Lisa realized she had played a significant role in Khan's guilt. After all, she had been the one sending him away, making him look for happiness in other women's embrace. "I'm also jealous about your grace," Lisa continued, her fingers sliding down until she planted her palm on the center of Monica's chest, "about the mark you left on him and his proclivity toward skirts." Monica realized how dangerous the situation was. Even if Lisa had no ill intentions, she was too strong for Monica. Her cold existence on its own was almost too much to bear for Monica. Nevertheless, learning about the skirts still put a faint smile on Monica's face. Even if her mind had accepted defeat, she felt happy that something of that magical relationship had survived. "Luckily," Lisa added, "your chest is average." The smile that had started to broaden on Monica's face froze, replaced by a frown, which Lisa didn't bother to inspect. The latter suddenly let go of Monica, turning to browse over the cavity's bottom. Monica blinked, inevitably looking down at her cleavage. She never had any meaningful inferiority complex there, and she pushed Lisa's words aside before they could give birth to one. "I'm jealous of you, too," Monica said, deciding to avoid delving into petty topics. "The way you stand at his side. You gave him something I never could." "I know," Lisa claimed. "I saw that the first time I pushed him down. He seemed to have forgotten that it could happen." Memories of intimate moments with Khan rose into Monica's mind. She knew he always helped her move him and held back during their passion, and getting reminded of that didn't exactly feel good. "He hadn't touched a bed since your breakup," Lisa revealed. "Or pillow, for that matter." That flood of memories disappeared, replaced by genuine surprise. Monica's lips parted, but no words came out of them. She couldn't even feel glad or proud. It only pained her that the breakup had hurt Khan so deeply. "Do you want to know how long it took us to break his ship's bed?" Lisa wondered, turning to face Monica again, expressionless as always. "Do you want to know how long it took us to leave that bed?" Monica was struggling to keep up with Lisa. On the one hand, she seemed to want to praise Monica, but remarks about her superiority always followed. "Miss Lisa," Monica called, getting closer and closer to snapping. "My princess, if you have a point, I request you to make it." Lisa's cold eyes darted over Monica's face, only to roll in what looked like annoyance, which a traditional Nichols bow followed. "Miss Solidary," Lisa called, "I wish for us to be friends." Chapter 1439, Worth. Truth be told, Lisa had never planned to come off as petty as she did, but couldn't help herself. Jenna had been relatively easy to handle. Despite her teasing, she had never truly done anything with Khan. Lisa could almost treat her as an inexperienced child, knowing she held the upper hand in basically everything, chest size aside. Instead, Monica had shared actual experiences with Khan. They had been there for each other for years, loving each other, planning their marriage, and even attempting to build a family. Also, Lisa could face Jenna on equal terms, while Monica was a human. Their perception of the world couldn't be more different, and the same went for their values. That gave birth to a jealousy Lisa couldn't convey properly, but the matter was far deeper than that. Monica had been crucial in Khan's development and his current relationship with Lisa. His love for her had been so real that the breakup had made him desperate enough to be selfish, leading to Lisa's kidnapping despite all the problems that could cause. Therefore, Lisa was certain of the vital place Monica occupied in Khan's heart, leading to quite a conflicting stance. On the one hand, Lisa was genuinely grateful. All her happiness wouldn't have been possible without Monica. Her husband was partially the man he was thanks to Monica. She had to happen so that their family could exist. However, Lisa also hated how deeply Monica had hurt Khan. She loathed how important Monica had been in his life to leave such deep scars. Yet, more than anything, Lisa hated herself. All that pain, jealousy, and guilt was her fault, and Monica embodied her sin, acting as a constant reminder of what her family had suffered to come to be and the price she still had to pay. If normal, ordinary people were involved, Lisa would just cut Monica out of her life entirely, removing that meaningful but deeply troubling presence from the happy family she had miraculously obtained. Even if Monica remained in the picture due to political reasons or something else, Lisa had her tattoos and daughter as undeniable proof of her status. Nothing could reassure her more than that, especially knowing how her husband's stupid mind worked. Nevertheless, Lisa knew she couldn't turn Monica into a stranger. That wasn't the Nichols way, and both her husband and Monica still cared deeply for each other. Lisa's previous inspection had confirmed that, so Monica had to stay, either as a simple friend or as a proper sister. Sadly, something even greater than a language barrier was at play there. Monica's perspective had broadened during her relationship with Khan, but that knowledge was mostly Khan-related. She could guess Lisa's motives, but couldn't help but focus on other traits. The bow Lisa had performed was what Khan always wore whenever he didn't know how to interact with a different species. The tattoos on her left arm also matched what Khan had on his shoulder, which had now grown to cover his entire limb. Other, less glaring but impossible to miss details also felt evident to Monica. She didn't exactly spot them rationally, but her subconscious did, leading to a conclusion similar but opposite to Lisa's. Monica saw so much of Lisa reflected in her memories of Khan. She had always known she had big shoes to fill, despite Khan saying otherwise, but that face-to-face showed her exactly how impossible the task had been. Khan's very way of love came from Lisa. It might have targeted Monica at some point, but it remained Lisa's creation. It existed because of and for Lisa, just like Khan had vowed in the footage of their marriage. Thinking about that footage made Monica divert her gaze. She knew she had to agree with Lisa. It was the right choice, especially politically, but a wild unwillingness rose through her, making her forget her place. "How dare you?" Monica asked, the question making Lisa lift her glowing gaze toward her. "You come here reminding everyone that you are his wife," Monica said, almost shouting, showing how happy you made him and how easy it was for you to do it. Lisa broke her bow, remaining silent while straightening herself. "Don't you think I know he held back for my sake?" Monica shouted. "Don't you think I know I couldn't push him down? That I wasn't his match no matter what I did?" Monica scoffed, shaking her head, stepping back, only to hit the cavity's wall, reminding her that she was trapped in that conversation. "Don't you think I know he couldn't love me like he loved you?" Monica cried, her eyes growing teary as she leaned on that rocky surface and lifted her face. "And he warned me," Monica continued, calmer now. "He tried to stay away, but I kept chasing him. I didn't know anything, but I couldn't help myself." Monica's voice cracked near the end of her statement, that feature becoming evident as she added some final words. "And now I'm ruined." Lisa followed Monica with her glowing gaze as she slid over the cavity's wall, sitting on the bedrock and hugging her knees. "I tried so hard," Monica sniffed. "I gave everything to make it work, but it just wasn't enough. I wasn't enough." Monica wiped out the tears flowing down her face, only to quickly give up on that, hiding her head behind her knees. "The best thing I ever did for him was to send him away," Monica stated. "That's what my worth amounts to." Silence fell, only interrupted by Monica's occasional sniffs, but Lisa knew she wasn't done. "No one will ever look at me in the same way," Monica declared. "No one will ever touch me like that. No one will ever love me like he did." Most people would come to resent that, considering it a mistake, but Monica almost felt shame knowing that she stood on the very opposite end of the spectrum. "And I can't bring myself to regret it," Monica cried. "I still love Khan. I'm so happy for him. It just hurts." Lisa had never been good with people. It took Khan to make her start having friends again, but they weren't many, and she had never learned how to act correctly with them anyway. Monica's words had resonated with Lisa. In a way, the two of them had gone through very similar experiences, creating a connection Lisa couldn't deny. Still, she wasn't sure how to get that point through or what to do next in general. The mindset barrier worsened all that, so Lisa abandoned complicated speeches or strategies, defaulting to the Nichols ways. She stepped forward, and Monica raised her head when she felt something cold land on her shoulder. "I was such a stupid girl back then," Lisa said, sitting at Monica's side, resting her head on her shoulder. "I cursed Khan before sending him away. Of that, I'll never forgive myself." Chapter 1440, Exceptional. Monica didn't really want to hear Lisa's side of the story. Her previous outburst had been just that. If it were up to her, she would leave the conversation at that, continuing to remain outside those matters in the hope of overcoming them eventually. Yet, Monica had to admit she was tired of avoiding the world. Her office had become a cage of her own creation, isolating her from everything and everyone. The way she saw it, the other sides of her life were over anyway, so there was no point in engaging with them anymore. After all, the heights of life with Khan were irreplaceable and irreplicable. The world now only had tamer versions of that to offer, and Monica would even have to endure that public stain on her reputation before attempting to enjoy them. The trade-off wasn't worth it. Monica was far better off remaining in her makeshift exile. That had partially changed in the recent period, but Monica didn't think much of it. Her few dates with Rodney had merely been a way to enjoy fancy dinners and lunches. Her mind was still set on not returning to a life outside her office. Nevertheless, something in Lisa's gestures, words, and general vibe prevented Monica from rejecting her outright. Lisa's voice didn't waver, but Monica sensed her timid hesitation, as well as how close the topic was to her heart. That apparent and uncharacteristic vulnerability kept Monica's eyes on the cold head on her shoulder. Despite almost everything being different, Monica sensed a faint connection with that woman she had every right to hate. "I was young," Lisa announced. "I was in love. I thought I knew what needed to be done, but my broken heart broke again when I saw all the pain I caused." Monica knew exactly the kind of pain Lisa was talking about. She had slept next to it for years. Khan had been in pieces, carrying traumas deeper than he had ever realized. "That's my weight to bear," Lisa continued, "my responsibility. Even if it takes several lifetimes, I'll fix Khan. I'll force my husband into happiness, whether he wants it or not." Monica didn't reply, but her brain answered anyway. In her mind, Lisa had already succeeded. Monica had never seen Khan happier or so at ease. She had actually never dared to dream he would ever be like that. Yet, there was probably something that only Lisa could see, something too profound for Monica's eyes and mindset. That, or Lisa was a stubborn fool as well, unable to accept victory even when it stood right in front of her. "You are a casualty of love," Lisa exclaimed, "of which there are countless in the universe." Monica frowned, but Lisa spoke again before she could snap. "But don't ever dismiss yourself as worthless. You are so exceptional that I struggle to find reasons to keep you alive." Lisa lifted her head, only to find Monica blinking, unsure whether to run away at those last words. Still, Lisa surprisingly revealed a faint smile, reassuring Monica and keeping her there as she seized her hand. "I used to be colder," Lisa revealed, her fingers intertwining with Monica's, "but that never bothered Khan. He was also the only one who could warm me up, even back then." Lisa pulled Monica's hand, placing it at the center of her chest. "Khan, too, began to feel too hot," Lisa added, "with me as the only one who could cool him down." Monica had to admit that prolonged physical interaction with Lisa was already making her reach her limits. Despite the evolution making Lisa warmer, she remained too cold for Monica. Nevertheless, Monica didn't move or escape Lisa's grasp, seemingly in a daze as she waited for her to make her point. "My species has a deeper, broader concept of love," Lisa explained, "but we were seen as toxic even by Nicole's standards. We bordered on codependency, needing each other to ignore how broken we were." Lisa's smile couldn't help but grow broader and brighter as memories from 90s seeped into her brain. Still, she didn't forget to add her last point. "Our love was so intense and pure it survived 10 years of separation," Lisa declared. "That was what you were up against, but you made Khan love you anyway." Of course, Monica had always known that making Khan fall in love again would have been hard. However, hearing Lisa, it seemed her achievement had been far more incredible than she had ever thought. "You are exceptional, Miss Solidary," Lisa repeated. "Because of that, I'll never stop being jealous of you. But, I also want you in our lives, both for Khan, myself, our daughter, and yourself." Monica didn't really understand the connection there, but something in Lisa's smile made it make sense. "And do not fear," Lisa stated. "You will love again, as well as be loved in the way you deserve. My husband and I will make sure of that." Monica didn't think about the feasibility of that statement. She only knew she had lost the most important part of her life after breaking up with Khan, and Lisa was offering her a way back inside it. Things would obviously be different, but the genuine affection had and would remain. It's Monica, Monica said, and I loved your marriage, Lisa. Your vows were beautiful. Thank you, Monica, Lisa exclaimed. My husband's family wants us to host another celebration to make everything more official. I'd like you to attend it. I won't promise anything, Monica exclaimed. I have much work to do, and I don't know how much I want to see it again. I'll allow that traitorous human to attend, too, Lisa offered. Monica was initially confused, unable to connect the dots, but her eyes widened when she finally did. General Semmet and I aren't an item, Monica clarified. We aren't anything. I'm just using him to get out of the office every once in a while. Lisa didn't reply, but her eyes saw a lot. Monica was an open book for her. Still, she let go of the topic since Monica didn't seem ready to face it yet. Though, Lisa said, letting go of Monica's hand and diverting her gaze. Meeting our daughter is not up for discussion. Do you want to use your daughter to make me give up on Khan? Monica asked, knowing what Lisa was thinking since she would have used the same strategy. Yes, Lisa immediately confirmed before wearing a chaosheir expression. And I want to show off. She is our daughter after all. That cute face made Monica falter. The usually cold and aloof Lisa was incredibly huggable when she showed those expressions, but she held herself back, somehow managing to remain serious. Sure, Monica accepted, conveying how she truly felt. I wouldn't miss seeing Khan's daughter for anything in the world. Lisa showed an even brighter smile at Monica before her eyes widened, snapping up. White light started to come out of her body before a chilling gasp escaped her mouth. Snow. Monica squinted her eyes, only to realize that Lisa had disappeared when she reopened them. The event couldn't surprise her anymore, but something troubling soon popped into her mind. Did she forget about me? Monica wondered, thinking loudly as she looked at the bright clouds above and the immensely tall walls she couldn't hope to climb on her own. Luckily, white light shone around Monica in the next second, teleporting her away, too. This concludes the chapters. Show your appreciation by liking this video and subscribe.